Chapter 311, The Big Vicious Barbarian City. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu was in a desperate situation. So, he clenched his teeth to endure the pain. Simultaneously, he stimulated the movement of the golden sword in order to attack the python. He wanted to do so in order to create an opportunity to escape from its grip. He then actuated the operation of his real chi and the magic power in his body with all his strength. And, a layer of body protecting real chi emerged on his body once again. Then, he began to activate the chi spirit shield for his protection. Don't waste your strength. The red-ringed demon python had apparently felt Shi Mu's resistance. Therefore, it twisted its body to impose more force. Consequently, the pressure on Shi Mu's body increased to twice its previous intensity. The layer of real chi condensed shield on Shi Mu's body couldn't withstand this increased pressure, and crumbled with a bang sound. Consequently, Shi Mu didn't even get enough time to display the chi spirit shield. The chi and blood in Shi Mu's body started to tumble in a crazy manner. Also, a gee sound began to spread from the bones of his entire body. It seemed as if this enormous pressure could crush his entire body at any moment. His real chi and magic power were stirred up so much so that they started to flow in his body in a chaotic manner. But then, two wisps, one of real chi and one of magic power, rushed forth into his mind. Then, two peng sounds were heard. The golden crystal grain and the silver crystal grain in his mind shattered into pieces as soon as they came in contact with the wisp of real chi and the wisp of magic power respectively. They shattered, and turned into two virtual shadows. One of them was a golden sun shadow, while the other was a silvery white moon shadow. Then, the two shadows flashed and transformed into a golden air current and a silver air current. The two air currents then merged together in his mind, and took the shape of a golden and silver vortex. This vortex then started to rotate slowly. Then, a fervent flow rushed out of the bicolored vortex with a loud boom sound, and started to flow throughout Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu felt as if his blood had been set on fire for a while. In fact, he experienced a surge of a dry and fervent feeling from head to toe. This feeling seemed too difficult to endure. Shi Mu's body then emanated a magnificent white radiance. Simultaneously, an incomparably huge virtual shadow of a gigantic white ape emerged behind his body. It was so huge that it seemed as if it was connecting the earth to the sky. The white ape's shadow shot a fierce and angry glance at the red-ringed demon python. Simultaneously, its eyes gleamed with a bright golden light. The white ape's shadow had merely shot a glance at the python, but it was dangerous enough to flare up a strong sense of fear in its heart. It felt as if it had run into a huge and irresistible monster that was its natural enemy. The python's massive body couldn't help but tremble. It immediately lay prostrate on the ground before the white ape shadow. The python also loosened its grip on Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu was surprised to see these things. He couldn't understand why the python had bent its head on the ground all of a sudden. However, Shi Mu had experienced countless battles over the years. So, his vast experience naturally allowed him to think that he shouldn't let this golden opportunity slip by. Therefore, his fingers immediately moved to cast a spell. The golden sword in midair shone with magnificently bright radiance as Shi Mu's fingers moved. Then, it inflated and became 70 or 80 feet in size in a flash. The splendid brilliance of the golden sword dazzled like a golden sun. The massive golden sword flashed across the sky, and hacked toward the python's neck with a loud crashing sound. A buzzing sound was heard in the surrounding along with the whistling sound of wind. And, it seemed as if the space and time had frozen for an instant. The python's body got stiffened. And, a circle of blood appeared around its sturdy neck. The fact was that the house-sized huge head of the python had been cut off its body just a moment ago. It tumbled down with a loud peng sound like a huge rock carrying a few decrepit. The greater part of the head sank into the swamp. The python was dead, but it continued to make a few twitches for some time. Simultaneously, an endless stream of deep red blood gushed out of its body like a waterfall, and dyed the nearby ground and swamp red. The white ape's shadow behind Shi Mu's body had long disappeared without a trace. It had appeared only for a fleeting second. Shi Mu fell to the ground, but there was still a blank expression on his face. He flung his head a couple of times, and regained his sobriety. But then, he saw something that made his face beam with a blissful look. He saw that a cluster of red light had flown from the severed head of the python, and was trying to flee into the distance. "You want to run away?" Shi Mu thundered, and a dazzling black radiance gleamed on his body. Then, a huge shadow of a four-headed python appeared behind him. The python's shadow flashed to chase after the cluster of red light. Then, one of the snake heads opened its mouth, and bit that cluster of light. "Don't kill me. Otherwise, you will be subjected to a definite death." There was a miniature red snake amid that cluster of light. It was desperately struggling, but was unable to break free from the clutch. The other three snake heads also pounced over, and tore at the cluster of red light. They tore the red mass of light to pieces, and then swallowed it. Shi Mu felt a burst of dry and fervent feeling surging in his chest when they swallowed the red light. Also, the totem pattern on his chest emitted a dazzling red light which shrouded his entire body. The four-headed ominous python's virtual shadow behind his body suddenly released bright rays of light. And, a fifth snake head began to grow beside them. Shi Mu's face radiated with exultation as he witnessed this scene. Then, something crossed his mind, and he grabbed the beast soul bag that hung on his waist. He then pulled the string of the bag with one hand, and a bunch of beast souls began to fly out of it in quick succession. They then started to submerge into the four-headed python's virtual shadow one after another. The ominous python's totem on Shi Mu's chest suddenly emitted dazzling luminescence. Then, the python's virtual shadow behind his body flashed, and the fifth snake head grew up at an astounding speed. Simultaneously, a wisp of immense force reverberated in the totem within Shi Mu's body. Shi Mu's face sparkled with an indescribable ecstasy as he felt that the strength of his totem had become exceptionally immense now. He had apparently broken through a certain threshold, and ascended to an altogether new realm. Shi Mu closed his eyes, and felt the surging strength of the totem in his body. He opened his eyes after some time. Then, a ray of light flashed on his chest totem as soon as he stimulated its strength. The black scales sprouted on his body once again, and covered his entire body. In addition, his body grew by half a foot. He had completed the totem body transformation in a split second. However, the snake scales that had sprouted on his body this time gave him a completely different kind of feeling. The fact was that there was a layer of sparkling and translucent radiance on the black scales this time, as if the scales were covered with a thin film. Then, an explosion took place before Shi Mu's eyes, and his sensing ability jumped to a new realm. The fact was that his five senses had undergone an earth-shaking change after this explosion. Also, the speed of the vortex of real qi in his body had increased to a great extent. Moreover, it had turned into a liquid form. Shi Mu's body had begun to exude a wisp of incredibly mighty spiritual aura after these changes. Then, the black light condensed behind him, and took the form of a faint shadow of a five-headed ominous python's magic image. Earth rank. Shi Mu muttered to himself. He noticed that his totem had finally made a breakthrough to the fifth python head. So, he could to enhance his strength to the earth rank at one fell swoop if he stimulated the beast transformation to change his body. All Shi Mu could feel at this moment was a surge of inexplicably formidable strength running throughout his body. This new strength had surpassed his previous strength by far. He estimated that there was now a 70% certainty that he would triumph over that red-ringed demon python if he were to face it again with his present strength. Shi Tou. How did you? Cai swooped down from the sky at this moment. But, a fearful look spread across his face as he felt Shi Mu's escalated strength. In fact, he didn't dare to approach him. Shi Mu's eyebrows twitched into a frown as he heard his voice. He relieved the totem body transformation, and the black scales on his body immediately disappeared. Simultaneously, the liquid vortex of real qi in his lower abdomen, which was rotating at an incredible speed, reverted to the gaseous state. In addition, the formidable spiritual aura that he was exuding restored to its original state. Cai felt relieved, and landed on his shoulder. Shi Tou, you looked awfully dreadful when you were in that transformed state. Don't tell me you have already broken through the earth realm? Cai asked. Shi Mu nodded. That's wonderful. You possess tremendous strength now. Can we go straight to the rising to heaven's mountain peak now? Cai asked in an excited manner. Don't get too excited. It's true that I'm able to achieve the strength equivalent to the earth rank, but I can do so only after undergoing the beastly transformation. And, this kind of strength can't be considered as extraordinary in the Western continent. Anyway, we have to get out of this swamp of snakes first. Then, we will head to peaceful Sun City in order to pull out some necessary information related to the rising to heaven's mountain peak. We will draft our further plans thereafter, Shi Mu considered for a long time. Then, he shook his head and said. A few days later, it was almost dusk when Shi Mu finally stepped out of the swamp of snakes. There was a big dusky city not far from the swamp. It had stood majestically through the course of time. The city walls looked magnificent and towering. They stretched to either side in such a manner that it seemed as if there was no end to them. This city was called the Peaceful Sun City. It was the largest barbarian city in the eastern region of the Western continent. Lookout posts stood upright on either side of the 100 feet wide black city gates. A dozen or more barbarian soldiers stood at the city gates. They were in the uniform of the fierce snake tribe, and were inspecting the people who wanted to enter the city. According to the regulations, a person could enter the city free of charge if they belonged to the fierce snake tribe. The only thing that they needed to do in order to enter the city was to get their name registered. However, the people of the other tribes had to pay 10 spirit stones as the entrance fees. 10 spirit stones was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for an ordinary person in the eastern continent. After all, they were equivalent to 300,000 or 400,000 silver coins. However, they didn't seem anything big in the Western continent. And, that was perhaps due to the abundance of natural resources in this place. There was a big queue of barbarians of the other tribes in front of Shi Mu, and all of them were quickly paying the entrance fees. Therefore, Shi Mu felt that he had to do the same. The corners of Shi Mu's mouth curved into a grin, and he cursed a few words inwardly. However, he didn't speak anything. He just threw out 10 spirit stones, and walked straight into the city. Shi Mu's eyes widened the moment he entered the city. The thoroughfare that led to the front was large enough to accommodate 10 vehicles side by side. In addition, nearly all the buildings on either side of this road had been built with huge rocks. The appearance of these buildings looked majestic and extremely sturdy. There were rows of stores along the streets. The street was buzzing with the hustles and bustles of people at the moment. Most of the people on the street were barbarians of different tribes, judging from their appearance. However, there were also some grey-robed humans in this crowd. Shi Mu wasn't unfamiliar with this kind of clothing. He knew that these grey-robed people were the disciples of the Western Dark Moon cult. The present situation allowed Shi Mu to conclude that the Dark Moon cult and the barbarians race had maintained a very harmonious relationship with each other here. A veiled barbarian woman walked past Shi Mu at this moment. She had a very slim and graceful figure. She had attracted Cai's attention. The woman wore a close-fitting long skirt that was silver, blue, and gold in color. It was gracing the curves of her body in a magnificent manner. A small portion of her arms were exposed from her shirt. And, they looked exceptionally smooth and white. Her face was veiled, but her large and glistening eyes looked conspicuous on her veiled face. Cai immediately started to drool. Then, he became clamorous, Shi Tou, look at that girl. Quickly. The barbarian woman also heard Cai's screeching. She turned her head, and threw a surprised look at Shi Mu. But then, the expression in her eyes became very fervent. Shi Mu was tall and strong. His distinct features like his big eyes and thick eyebrows were considered striking in the human race. Moreover, Shi Mu had passed through years of hardships, experience, and slaughtering. Therefore, the wild and untamed aura around his body had become even stronger than that of any fierce barbarian man. On top of that, his jumping and swaying black torrent-like hair gave off a sense of bridal pride that was also a unique trait. This kind of disposition naturally had the greatest appeal to barbarian women. "Shi Tou, that girl is staring at you," Cai shouted loudly. Shi Mu stole a glance at the barbarian woman. Then, he flicked at Cai's head in anger, and shouted at him, "Shut up! Well, this barbarian woman is much hotter than any human woman. Shi Tou, you're not interested in her. We've barely set foot in this city. So, you'd better keep a low profile for now. Be careful that you don't get caught. Otherwise, your hair will be plucked off, and you'll be eaten alive. I've heard that the barbarians love eating raw meat." Shi Mu said. Cai's body shook up, and he looked at the people around. He saw that no one had noticed him yet. This made him heave a sigh of relief. But then, a whiff of exotic fragrance drifted into Cai's nose. He sucked in a long breath, and looked at Shi Mu. He then said in a pitiful manner, "Shi Tou, Cai is hungry. We've been on the road for a long time. So, there was nothing delicious to eat. I look much thinner now." Shi Mu's lips curled into a grin and he said, "You didn't get anything to eat? Vomit out those spirit stones, and give them back to me." "You can't say that. Your bag is bulging nowadays. So, such a small number of spirit stones can be considered very insignificant in your eyes. The delicious food here is so rare to come by." "Shi Tou," Cai grumbled with some dissatisfaction. "Wait until the meal time. Then, you can speak about this matter again." Shi Mu said in a manner that made it seem as if he was in foul mood. After that, he went straight ahead. Chapter 312, uncovers the history of the Western continent. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu wandered around the peaceful Sun City for some time, and found that this city bore a little similarity to some of the cities of the Eastern continent. The size of this city wasn't as small, but it made him feel as if he had returned to his native place. In fact, some of the residential areas reflected the natural style of the vicious barbarians' tribes. A broad view of this city allowed Shi Mu to conclude that most of the buildings here were single-story. Double-story or multiple-story buildings were very scarce in the city. Shi Mu was walking around the city. He found that the majority of shops along the street were primarily dealing in spirit materials, various kinds of pills, and demon beasts materials. In fact, the shops that sold finished products were extremely rare. So, it might be assumed that the barbarians of the Western continent weren't experts in this field of endeavor. They were in fact similar to the barbarians of the Eastern continent in this regard. Perhaps, this was one of the reasons why the various heavenly resources of this continent hadn't depleted yet. Shi Mu continued to roam around the city while having to endure Cai's non-stop blabbering. He finally stopped in front of the door of a two-story store. The building of this store appeared to be carved out of a huge pitch-black megalith which had a diameter of over 200 feet. A huge hollow had been cut open in the middle of the megalith in order to form the wide and open space of the store. It appeared rather unusual. This store was specialized in selling all kinds of spirit materials. In fact, it could be considered the largest store of its type in the entire city. There weren't many customers in the store at this moment. And, Shi Mu was glad to see that the store was free from commotion right now. So, he lifted his foot, and stepped in. A few exquisite wooden shelves were arranged in the shop. And, a lot of exotic flowers and plants were displayed on those shelves. Those plants and flowers were different from each other in terms of color and appearances. Shi Mu was dazzled for a moment by the intriguing strangeness of these things. Sea breeze rattan, pokeberry tail, golden desert sistunk, turtle mist grass. Shi Mu recognized a few spirit grasses when he calmed his mind and focused his attention. But, he kept harping on in a voice that only he could hear. There was indeed a reason behind Shi Mu's ability to recognize a small portion of the things that had been displayed in this shop. The fact was that he had obtained a few ancient books from his opponents over the past years. And, he had always flipped through those books during his leisure time. However, the small part of things he had just recognized had truly left him flabbergasted. Most of these things were crucial ingredients in the process of refining some high-ranked magic charms and pills. These things were considered very valuable, and were rarely seen in the markets of the eastern continent. A short and stout barbarian man walked over to him at this moment. He had thick eyebrows and net-like purple sideburns. A broad smile bloomed across his face as he greeted Shi Mu and said, "May I ask what my noble customer is looking for? Do you want me to introduce a couple of things?" This man's attire and temperament clearly looked different from the other attendants of this store. This indicated that he ought to be the manager of this store. He had presumably sensed that Shi Mu's cultivation wasn't weak. In addition, Shi Mu's distinguished bearing seemed to have engraved a profound impression in his mind. Therefore, the stout man used a very courteous language to interact with him. "May I know whether your store has the blood essence of a demon ape?" Shi Mu thought of something and asked. "Noble customer has indeed graced us with his presence at an opportune moment. The store has just received a batch of the blood essence of Cloudy Mudan's demon ape. I must say that it's a top-notch product. I wonder if the noble customer intends to take a look at it," the thick-browed man said. "I wonder if there is any blood essence in this batch which has a rank equivalent to, or beyond the peak of the Xian Tian realm," Shi Mu asked. The strength of Cloudy Mountain's demon ape is considered the greatest. But, it's still at the primary stage of the Xian Tian realm. So, I'm afraid that I'll have to disappoint my noble customer. I'm sorry, but let me be frank with you, you are unlikely to find the thing that you're looking for in the other spirit materials shops of this city. If you didn't find that thing in this shop," the thick-browed man said in an embarrassed tone. "Why? Is it so difficult to find a high-ranked demon ape?" Shi Mu asked. "My dear customer seems to be unaware of it. Our eastern regions attach more importance to the snake class and python class demon beasts. This is because it's generally difficult to find trails of high-ranked demon apes. After all, the demon apes inhabit the elevated areas, and those regions are very far from here. Moreover, those areas are flooded with all kinds of perils. Therefore, the supply of materials acquired from a high-ranked demon ape is extremely scarce here. However, auctions are occasionally conducted in the city. And, it might appear in the auctions if our luck is good," the thick-browed man explained. Shi Mu smiled wryly in his heart. It seemed that he still needed favorable luck to find the blood essence of a demon ape. So, he had no other choice but to set aside this matter for the time being. He was about to depart when an idea streaked across his mind. So, he asked again, "Oh, by the way. I wonder whether I can ask your excellency about something." "My noble customer can feel free to ask anything. I'll tell you everything as long as I know about it," the thick-browed man replied with a smile. "Have you heard about the rising to the Heaven Mountain peak?" Shi Mu asked. "My dear customer is inquiring about this mountain peak. Could you possibly be thinking of going there?" The thick-browed man looked surprised when he asked. Shi Mu's mouth slightly moved, but he didn't give him a reply. "I'm sorry for being blunt, but you won't be allowed to go to that place," the man's thick eyebrows creased as he said. "Oh, why is that so?" Shi Mu looked somewhat confused when he asked. "The rising to the Heaven Mountain peak is a holy land of the demon race. So, it's needless to say how dangerous that place would be. Even ordinary demon beasts aren't allowed to approach that mountain at will, let alone the barbarian people," the man with thick eyebrows explained. "Holy land?" Shi Mu asked in a doubtful manner. "It happens that even I have little knowledge about this matter. But, I'll give our noble customer a couple of details since he seems interested in it," the thick-browed man said. That would be great. I'll always be grateful to your excellency for this favor, Shi Mu replied. Shi Mu had finally gained a little understanding of Western continent's history from the words of the thick-browed man. He had also gained some knowledge of the prevailing situation. According to his narration, the Western continent was divided into 36 small and large regions. The rising to the heaven mountain peak was located in the beautiful Gauze region. And, this region fell in the central part of the Western continent. It was said that this peak soared high into the clouds, as if it was connecting the earth to the sky. This peak was guarded by 3 big forces as their holy land these days. And, these 3 forces were considered the most vigorous tribes of the demon race. No one was allowed to approach this mountain. And, anyone who attempted so, would be killed without any explanation. As for why this mountain peak was called the Holy Land of the demon race, one must jump thousands of years back to know the details. It was said that there had been only 2 races in the Western continent in those days, the barbarian race and the demon race. The demon race was divided into altogether 72 branches back then. The demon tribes were large in number, and had occupied a large part of the continent's core regions. Meanwhile, the entire barbarian race was led by 10 big tribes back then. These 10 tribes had mainly occupied the peripheral regions of the continent. The totem warriors in the barbarian race often needed a large number of beast souls and demon beasts materials during the course of their cultivation. So, they had frequently slaughtered demon beasts. Consequently, the vigorous ones in the demon race had begun to launch counterattacks on the barbarians. This process had continued for a long time. And, the contradictions between the 2 races had become increasingly intense as a result. And, war had eventually erupted between them. The dispute between the 2 races had continued to grow for hundreds of years after that war. Innumerable small and large-scale battles had erupted between them afterwards. Consequently, the Western continent had been filled with rivers of blood for some time. The barbarians were far superior to the demons in terms of intelligence. Besides, they also had the totem's secret technique to make magic tools and spirit tools. On top of that, the barbarian kings of the 10 big barbarian tribes had formed an alliance. They all had joined forces to vent anger against their common enemy. So, the barbarians had gradually started to gain the upper hand in the battle. On the other side, the tribes of the demon race had harbored many conflicting views amongst themselves. So, they hadn't been able to form a concerted force. Thus, they were gradually being vanquished by the barbarians. They had suffered disastrous casualties in the battles that followed. Also, a large area that belonged to the demon race had been captured by the barbarians in the end. But then, a demon king had suddenly appeared in the demon race one day in this miserable situation. His appearance bore a strong resemblance to that of a white ape. He subdued the leaders of all 72 demon tribes at one fell swoop with his sheer strength. After that, he used the rising to the heaven mountain peak as his stronghold to lead the demon race's reign over the western continent. The barbarians had been in full swing with their grand victory over the demon race at that time. But, the demon king soon inflicted a crushing defeat on them. Most of the barbarian kings of the 10 big barbarian tribes had either been killed or wounded in this process. In fact, each and every tribe had fallen apart as a result. This white ape, the demon king, later proclaimed that he would drive away all barbarians from this continent. His overbearing flame of anger and arrogance was unrivaled for a period of time. So, there was a time when our barbarian race had fallen into a precarious situation, the man with the thick eyebrows narrated. The white ape. Can it be? Shi Mu received a powerful jolt in his heart the moment he heard these 2 words. And then, something crossed his mind for a fleeting second. Mr. Manager, where had this white ape, the demon king, come from? Cai abruptly opened his mouth and asked. He had been standing on Shi Mu's shoulder this entire time. Some people say that the demon king white ape had descended from the heavens. Some people say that he was an ancient demon who had retreated after thousands of years of seclusion practice. However, many people in the demon race believe that the demon king White Ape had descended from rising to the heavens mountain peak. Basically, there are different opinions in this regard. But there is no written proof of any of this. The man with thick eyebrows cast a glance at Cai in astonishment. Then, he said while shaking his head. Cai was about to ask something again when he was hit by Shi Mu's finger. So, he immediately quieted down like a well-behaved parrot. What happened afterwards? Shi Mu asked. The things that happened afterwards seem somewhat dramatic. A group of humans from the eastern continent crossed the western border and arrived here. They claimed to be the disciples of the Dark Moon cult. They hadn't had any foundation when they had first entered the western continent. But, they soon reached an agreement with the barbarian kings. They then started to cooperate with our barbarian people, and jointly waged war against the demon race. The barbarians' strength had tremendously increased with the assistance of the Dark Moon cult's dead spirit creatures. Eventually, they had somehow coped up with the demon race. However, the strength of that demon king White Ape was unparalleled at that time. So, the battles would still seem lopsided whenever he'd showed up to fight. There was a time when the barbarians and the Dark Moon cult had become completely incapable of withstanding the overwhelming pressure. But then, the demon king suddenly disappeared at such a crucial time, just like he had appeared before. He disappeared without a trace. Shi Mu said in a surprised tone. That's right. Then, an internal disorder sparked off amongst the tribes of the demon race. In fact, that wasn't even long after the White Ape disappeared from here. Moreover, the two races had become very tired of this exhaustive war that had continued for almost 100 years. So, the war gradually subsided. The demon race has considered the rising to the heavens mountain peak their holy land since then. It is said to be the place where the White Ape Demon King had appeared and later disappeared. The demon race believes that the White Ape Demon King will appear there again someday. So, this is the case, Shi Mu nodded in a thoughtful manner. The two men exchanged a few words for some time. After that, Shi Mu bid goodbye to him. However, he purchased a few kinds of spirit materials before leaving from here since he needed them for drawing high-ranked magic charms. He also didn't forget to express his sincere gratitude to the manager for his gracious help. Shi Mu continued to walk along the street after he stepped out of the store. It seems that the situation here is far more complicated than we expected. The rising to the heavens mountain peak is a holy land. So, I'm afraid that it won't be easy to go there. Shi Tou, what's your next plan? Cai had listened to the entire story with great relish. But, he still felt as if he was shrouded with a sense of uncertainty, as if some points had remained unexplained. But, Shi Mu remained silent. He didn't speak anything for a moment. I'm thinking about it again. It's already noontime. I'm very hungry. My tummy is all empty. You had promised me that you would first look for a place to eat something, Cai screeched. The only thing you know is eating and drinking all day long. You never think about anything else, Shi Mu looked at Cai, and said in a manner that made it seem as if he was in a foul mood. Why did I let you be my master? You are naturally the one who would think over this troublesome matter. Cai quick-fired in response. Shi Mu shook his head. And walked toward the front. He then arrived in front of a restaurant after a while. It was a well-decorated restaurant which looked rather luxurious. This is it, Shi Mu took a step, and walked in. This was a very large restaurant with magnificent decorations, and a very atmospheric layout. Dear customer, you are heartily welcomed here. Shi Mu had hardly entered the restaurant when a waiter greeted him. Arrange a peaceful room, and some nice snacks, Shi Mu said. Also, get some good wine if there is any, Cai interrupted. The waiter shot an awestruck glance at Cai when he heard his voice. This place was Western Continent, and there were all kinds of demon beasts here. However, it was still rare to see a bird talk around here. Okay, please come upstairs, he complied, and led Shi Mu to the first floor. The layout of the first floor looked very distinct. It was divided into several private boxes. And, each box was almost independent of the others, and very peaceful. The martial arts practitioners could stay alive without eating any food for a long time once they stepped into the Xian realm. They'd only need to absorb spiritual energy from the surroundings in order to survive. However, Shi Mu hadn't had a proper meal for so long due to the journey. It could be said that he had been wandering around in a desperate plight throughout this journey. Therefore, it was indeed very rare to see him sit down, and satisfy his appetite. Chapter 313, Surrounds the City to Find the Killer. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu and Cai entered a private box on the second floor of the restaurant under the guidance of the restaurant's waiter. The restaurant soon sent 2 waiters to deliver a few delectable snacks and fine wines to them. Cai's eyes brightened up, and he issued a cheerful squeal as he saw the food. Then, he charged forward, and started to gorge himself with quick chewing motion. The corners of Shi Mu's mouth exposed a hint of smile when he saw Cai's behavior. The fact was that they hadn't enjoyed this kind of carefree time for so long. Therefore, Shi Mu also felt a spurt of relief gushing in his heart at the moment. He reached out with his hand for a wine cup, and took a sip. The wine lingered on the tip of his tongue for a moment since it was very spicy and strongly fragrant. It was indeed a top-grade wine in the category of wild and strong alcoholic drinks. The sound of footsteps spread from the stairs below at this moment. Then, a bunch of pedestrians walked up to the second floor. This group was composed of several people. Shi Mu's heart thumped a bit. He glanced outside through a narrow slit in the door, and his eyes couldn't help but slightly congeal. Some of the people in this group were humans who were clad in grey robes. They held magic sticks and swords in their hands. They were clearly the members of the Dark Moon cult. However, the clothes of a few people among these grey-robed people were clearly somewhat different. This style of dressing stemmed from the Eastern Dark Moon cult. The group of people sat down in a relatively larger box not far from Shi Mu's. They pulled up the screen to cover up their room from any obstruction. Their voices were sealed off inside due to the screen. Only indistinct sounds could make their way out of that room. What happened, Shi Tou? Cai was absorbed in gobbling up food with full enthusiasm. He raised his neck, and gave a contented burp. But then, he noticed the abrupt changes in Shi Mu's facial expression. So, he asked. Shi Mu made a hand gesture to shut him up. He then put down the wine cup, and closed his eyes. Then, he released the power of his totem, and moved his ears a bit. The reception of voices became louder as a result. And, the voices from that particular private box poured into his ears in a very distinct manner. Brother Li, this group of brothers respects you very much. Brother Ba is very polite. I should be the one to offer respect. Brother Li has said this in a manner that made it seem as if he regards me as an outsider. We've been placed in different areas. But, we all belong to one sect. You and my comrades have been brought together by our sect. After all, you all have been sent to the peaceful Sun City as well. So, I expect that we brothers will take care of each other hereafter. Okay. Then, I'll trouble Brother Ba later. Where do these words come from? Come, let's drink. Tell us something about your adventures at the sea. Then, a clinking sound of glasses was heard as a toast was made. Shi Mu's eyebrows twitched upward as he heard these words. It seemed that Luan's Eastern Dark Moon cult had already gotten in touch with the Western Dark Moon cult during this period of time. Shi Mu wasn't aware of the specific situation these days. But, he could tell from these people's conversation that the Eastern cult's disciples had already integrated into the Western cult. Also, they all had been distributed to various cities and branches. He chuckled as he understood the step taken by the people of the Western cult. It seemed that there were people who feared the Eastern cult. So, such people had perhaps seized their power of unity by deliberately dispersing these disciples to various subalters. But, Luan was an arrogant man with high ambitions. He had put his heart and soul into staging a comeback someday. So, he must be waiting for an opportunity to launch a counterattack against the eastern continent. And, this meant that he might not be willing to stay inside the fence for a long time. The Dark Moon cult of the western continent was apparently going to be faced with some major fluctuations in the future. Shi Tou, what are you smiling at? Tell me what you just listened to. You're not allowed to keep all the pleasure to yourself, Cai mumbled to himself in a discontented manner. It's not an important matter. They're just a bunch of Dark Moon cult's disciples. Shi Mu gave him a brief and simple recount of everything that he had just heard along with his own conjecture. Luan is so treacherous. Shi Tou, you must be careful if you run into him someday. Cai's body was shaken up without a reason when he heard the name Luan. In fact, it seemed as if he had heard about a frightful thing. He, I don't want to meet him either, Shi Mu replied. The people of the Eastern Dark Moon cult have also marked their presence in this peaceful Sun City. And, it would perhaps be very troublesome for us if they recognized you. So, what are you planning to do now? Cai asked. I don't have to do anything as far as the Eastern Dark Moon cult is concerned. What could they do to me even if they recognized me? Shi Mu lifted the wine cup, and drained it in one gulp. The cold and clear wine entered his throat, and rendered him a feeling that shook up his mind and spirit. That's true. There is probably no palace lord other than Luan that is capable enough of retaining you, Cai said. Well, I've eaten a lot, and my stomach is full. So, let's go, Shi Mu stood up, and walked outside the private box. Cai also followed him. Shi Mu then left the restaurant, and walked straight in the direction of the city's gate. You've already decided where you want to go? Cai said. We're heading to the west, Shi Mu nodded. The fact was that Shi Mu had no interest in the dispute between the various races of the western continent. Instead, he only wanted to enhance his strength on his way to the rising to the heaven mountain peak. At this moment, bang! Suddenly, a loud sound of explosion spread from outside the city's gate. This sound was muffled, yet very loud, so much so that the ground was somewhat shaken by the impact of this explosion. In fact, the tiles of the nearby houses also revealed a fit of tremor. The people on the street stopped their work, and looked toward the source of the sound one after another. What happened? What's going on? Shi Mu's complexion changed, and he rushed in the direction of the city's gate. He even sent Cai to find out the cause of this chaos. A dot of golden light appeared before his eyes after a moment, and quickly enlarged. And, the situation at the city's wall appeared in his mind. Barbarian soldiers were stationed at the lookout posts on the city's walls on all sides. They looked alert and ready to meet any contingency. They were closing the huge city gates on both east and west sides of the city at the moment. Furthermore, a large number of all kinds of demon beasts were gradually appearing in all the horizons outside the city. And, they were advancing straight toward the peaceful Sun City in a majestic manner. A wave of numerous demon wolves, demon foxes, and all kinds of snake-class demon beasts were approaching the city. In fact, there were thousands of them. There were several incredibly large demon beasts in front of many small-sized demon beasts. They were running towards the peaceful Sun City. And, their footsteps were issuing terrific rumbling sounds and vibrations. The complexions of the barbarian soldiers on the city's walls started to change as the demon beasts approached from all directions. It seemed as if they had almost frozen to the spot in shock. Why are there so many demon beasts? This is the beast's tide, we have been besieged. Quickly notify the senior lord of the city. A figure stood alone on the corner of a tall building near the city's wall. It was Shi Mu, he had just rushed over here. His complexion also profoundly changed when he saw the situation outside the city. Then, the vigorous sound of a bugle horn spread from the city. And, many silhouettes flew out of the city, and landed on the surrounding city walls. There were dozens of them. Moreover, a burst of droning sound was heard at the same time. The four corners of the peaceful Sun City lit up with four groups of bright lights. Then, they began to spread at an astonishing speed, and turned into a massive hemisphere-shaped light curtain. It was similar to a large inverted bowl. It enveloped the entire city inside it. The flustered people in the city calmed down when they saw the protective shield around the city. Two person silhouettes soared from the city at this moment. They were emitting waves of overwhelming spiritual pressure. They stood side by side in the air. The person that stood on the left side was a majestic-looking middle-aged man. He had a tall stature, and was dressed in a yellow robe with golden belt. In addition, there was a purplish golden crown on his head, and he had grizzled hair on his temples. However, his hands were pure white like a jade. He looked indescribably calm at the moment. His overall disposition made the people feel an air of boundless strength around him. The other person was a young woman in a grey dress. She was blessed with a perfect and exquisite figure. A smile hung at the corners of her mouth at the moment. In addition, she carried a smear of unique charm in the gap between her eyebrows. The expression in Shi Mu's eyes changed, and revealed a hint of astonishment. He had never seen the golden-crowned middle-aged man before. However, this grey-skirted young woman was one of the palace lords of the Eastern Dark Moon cult. Her name was Pang Yu. Shi Mu was indeed in a surprised state. But, it wasn't due to her sudden appearance here. It was because Pang Yu's temperament seemed to have undergone a tremendous change here. She didn't seem to be the same icy cold beauty she used to be. Moreover, the spiritual pressure that this woman was sending forth at the moment seemed somewhat stronger than before. In fact, her attainment made Shi Mu's heart throb for a moment. Is it possible that this woman has had a fortuitous encounter here in such a short span of time? Or, is it the strong spiritual aura of this place that has allowed her to break through the bottleneck of her cultivation art? Shi Mu conjectured in his heart. Transmit an order. All guards must protect the city walls from all four sides. Also, turn on all machineries for the protection of the city, the golden-crowned middle-aged man said. His voice wasn't loud, but it spread all over the city nonetheless. The guards that were in the city rushed forth to the city walls in succession. Then, they started their actions. Soon, huge wooden pillars emerged on the city walls. A crossbow was put up on top of each wooden pillar. Stone chariots and other such things also appeared on the city's walls. Each one of them was engraved with totem magic characters of the barbarian race. In fact, they seemed to be some sort of magic tools which had been made to receive and support magic spells. The tide of demon beasts had assembled 1,000 feet away from the city's wall by the time these arrangements were set in order. But, they didn't attack the city immediately. Instead, they crouched in their places in a silent manner. These demon beasts were incredibly huge in number, so much so that the imposing spiritual aura that they were exuding was dreadful enough to make the people in the city tremble with fear. The golden-crowned middle-aged man and the grey-skirted young woman revealed an anxious expression on their faces when they saw the demon beasts outside the city. The two people exchanged a glance. Then, the golden-crowned middle-aged man flicked his hand, and shot out a streak of green light. It touched the light curtain around the wall, and a small crack split open in the light curtain. The two passed through that gap, and flew outside the city. I'm Yukan, the Lord of the peaceful Sun City. And, she is Pang Yu, the altar lord of the Dark Moon cult's subaltar for this city. I wonder why my noble friends suddenly mounted a large-scale invasion on our peaceful Sun City. Did we do anything wrong? Could it be that you want to trigger a war between the demon race and the barbarian race? The golden-crowned middle-aged man's voice spread everywhere like a surging tidal wave. The small and weak demon beasts exposed fearful looks on their faces since their cultivations were weak. In fact, they even stepped a few steps back. Then, a mass of black smoke flew from the crowd of the demon beasts. It floated and arrived in front of the golden-crowned middle-aged man and the grey-skirted woman. A black-cloaked man's silhouette came into appearance with a flash of black light. The stature of this person was similar to that of a human being, but he had a long and black snake's tail behind his body. Moreover, the skin of his entire body was covered with uneven black scales. His pupils looked fiery red in color, like a pair of deep red flames. Also, the fine vertical lines in his pupils were emanating an ice-cold glint. There was a golden ring on his finger. The ring was embedded with a white gemstone. It looked no better than any ordinary ring, but the number 67 was engraved on top of the gemstone. The golden-crowned middle-aged man and the grey-skirted woman's facial expression simultaneously changed as their eyes fell on that golden ring. "Is your excellency possibly the chief of the Python demon race? Is my noble friend Ao Kuei Dragon General Kuei?" the golden-crowned middle-aged man asked after a momentary hesitation. "That's right, I'm Ao Kuei," the black-cloaked man replied. But, his voice sounded very cold and austere. "Noble friend Ao Kuei, you've suddenly led a large number of demon beasts to this place. May I know the reason behind this abrupt step?" the golden-crowned middle-aged man asked. "To apprehend the murderer," the black-cloaked man responded. The golden-crowned middle-aged man heard this, and cast a glance at Pang Yu who stood beside him. He was apparently astounded to hear these words. "The murderer?" the golden-crowned middle-aged man asked. "Humph, a fellow brother of my race was killed in the swamp of snakes a few days ago. Even his soul was taken away by that person. And, I've found out after a thorough investigation that the murderer has taken shelter in this city," the man in the cloak stated with a cold snort. His words had barely faded when Shi Mu's complexion changed. He stood on top of a certain high-rise building in the city at the moment. Cai was also shocked to hear these words. He cast a fleeting glance at Shi Mu, and his body shook in a somewhat restless manner. The two had immediately recalled that earth-ranked red-ringed demon python that Shi Mu had recently killed in the swamp of snakes. Chapter 314, A Bet of 3 Strikes. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Hey, Shi Tou, that Dragon General Zhao Kuei just mentioned. He isn't talking about that red-ringed demon python that you had killed? Cai asked in a soft voice. I'm afraid he is, Shi Mu replied in a casual manner. This, Cai felt somewhat uneasy when he heard the reply. Are you afraid of something? There is no living witness to that incident. So, put off this discussion until a later time, and focus on the present situation, Shi Mu replied. The conversation between the three powerhouses continued in midair outside the city. I don't want to make things difficult for you today. Hand over the murderer who has killed the fellow younger brother of my race. And, I assure you that I will make them withdraw. Otherwise, this person vows that he will raise this peaceful Sun City to the ground, the cloaked man's cold voice resounded. Your Excellency's words have unfurled a suspicion in my heart. I had received a message a few days back that there was an earth-ranked python demon beast in the swamp of snakes. And, it was slaughtering both humans and barbarians that would pass through there. Presumably, that python was the same fellow younger brother of your Excellency, the golden-crowned middle-aged man. Yukan's eyebrows creased as he said. That's right. So what? Ao Kuei said in a cold voice. Humph. That fellow brother of your race has killed more than 100 people of both human and barbarian races so far. So, how should we settle this account? Yukan said with a cold snort. It's ridiculous. Swamp of Snakes falls into the territory of our demon race. However, the people of both human and barbarian races have been visiting it arbitrarily over the last couple of years. Moreover, they have preyed on a number of my fellow tribesmen during this time. So, this is nothing but a self-inflicted disaster, that's all. Ao Kuei said. In that case, Your Excellency similarly has no right to complain about the murder of your fellow younger brother. Your fellow brother mustn't have been as good as his opponent. So, this is also a matter of self-inflicted disaster, Yukan sneered as he replied. Ao Kuei blazed in a fit of fury, and his body exuded a tremendous amount of black light. Simultaneously, an overwhelming and terrifying force burst forth from his body, and proliferated in all directions. In the city, Shi Mu felt a slight chill in his heart. Ao Kuei's strength was evidently far beyond the astonishing strength of that red-ringed demon python. He was probably at the advanced stage of the Earth realm. Noble friend Ao Kuei, I request that you not rush into a fight. Please allow this humble woman to share her views. Pang Yu finally opened her mouth and said. She had been standing beside Yu Ken this entire time with her mouth shut. Her voice was similar to that of an oriole leaving the valley. The people's heart skipped a beat when they heard her melodious voice. Ao Kuei's brows snapped into a frown, but he couldn't refrain from looking at Pang Yu a couple of times. The black radiance on the surface of his body somewhat subsided. Noble friend Ao Kuei, this humble woman has also heard about the strength of the fellow brother of your excellency's race. He was regarded as an expert in your race. Let's assume for a moment that City Lord Yu Ken had personally undertaken the task to dispose of your fellow brother. However, it would have been impossible for him to kill your fellow brother with ease, regardless of how confident he would have been about his victory. In addition, we only have a handful of Earth-ranked warriors, and all of them are inside the city these days. They haven't stepped outside the city. So, it's highly unlikely that any one of them would have entered the swamp of snakes. Our noble friend can personally investigate whether this humble woman's statement is true or not if he doesn't believe it. Also, the demon race already has many spies outside the city. So, Your Excellency must know whether any one of us had left the city or not, Pang Yu said. Both barbarian and human races are very deceitful. It appears that you want to cover it up. So, how could those people detect it? Besides, I don't care about those people. I shall forthwith issue an order to besiege the city if you don't hand over the murderer. Ao Kuei's eyebrows twitched upward, and he said with a sneer. Your Excellency is indeed very conceited. Can it be that you don't have even a little respect for us? Yu Ken's brows creased as he said. He, you're right about this. This Ao has never cared about both barbarian and human races. So, cut the crap. Hand over the murderer now, or be prepared to die. The black radiance on Ao Kuei's body brightened once again. Enough of this wild and boastful talk. Yu Ken was enraged, so much so that blue veins burst out on his forehead. It seemed that he was about to move into action. Wait a minute, Pang Yu appeared in front of Yu Ken like a flash of lightning, and blocked his path. Dear friend Ao Kuei, I don't know what the outcome of this war will be. But, one thing is certain, both sides will suffer huge losses if you choose to initiate the war. As far as I know, there are plenty of people that are targeting the throne of the tribe's chief in your Python demon tribe. You might be able to make us suffer a crushing defeat today. However, your strength will be severely affected as well. And, I'm afraid that you might not be able to retain the seat of the tribe's chief afterwards, Pang Yu said. Ao Kuei's eyebrows creased, and his face revealed a hint of hesitation. This humble woman has a proposal to put forth. How about we make a bet? Pang Yu said. A bet? Ao Kuei knitted his brows. Yes, this humble woman and city lord Yu Ken will receive 3 of your excellency's strokes. Your excellency will be allowed to enter the city and look for that murderer, if he succeeds in hitting any one of us. We won't raise any objection in this regard after that. However, I request your excellency to command your tribesmen to retreat in case the 2 of us turn out lucky enough to evade all 3 of your attacks. How about it? Pang Yu said. Yu Ken's eyes flashed, and he stole a glance at Pang Yu. But, he didn't say anything to stop her. Ao Kuei saw the facial expression of the 2 people, and knitted his brows in thoughtful concentration. He didn't speak anything for a moment. What's wrong? Are you afraid of this bet, Ao Kuei? Yu Ken sneered as he spoke up in a sarcastic tone. Fine, I accept this provoking plan today. It's a deal. Ao Kuei was enraged as he heard Yu Ken's sarcasm. So, he shouted back in reply. In that case, Your Excellency, please make your moves, Pang Yu waved her sleeves, and her body fluttered a few feet back. A faint green radiance also bubbled up on Yukan's body. He stood not far from Pang Yu. The demons outside the city, and the humans and barbarians in the city became silent. They were looking towards the showdown in an anxious manner. Shi Mu was still standing on that high-rise building in the city. He folded his hands across his chest, and waited to watch the bet between these three people. His face was smeared with a hint of great interest at the moment. After all, this highly intense confrontation was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to observe and emulate. This experience would certainly play a significant role in his future practices. In fact, it would also impart various styles of fighting to him for his future battles. So, it was worth watching. Shi Tou, they are going to fight. And all this happened because of you. But, it seems as if you are waiting to watch a play here like a bystander, Cai mumbled when he saw Shi Mu like this. The city lord is present on the scene. He will naturally carry out his duty to guard the city at all costs. And, it seems that Pang Yu mustn't have come to this city only recently. Otherwise, how could her relationship with the city lord be so cordial? Shi Mu replied without a trace of concern. By the way, do you think that the city lord Yukan and Pang Yu can evade 3 moves from Ao Kuei? Cai asked. It seems that Pang Yu has had a fortuitous encounter. Her strength has increased substantially. She has perhaps advanced to the peak of the half-moon rank. As for City Lord Yukan, he is also at the middle stage of the Earth realm. So, there shouldn't be any issue if these two people work together, Shi Mu replied. But, we have to think of a countermeasure in case these two lose this bet. After all, it would be terrible if that Dragon General Kuei has some means to find you. Cai looked worried as he said. Obviously, Shi Mu nodded. In midair, a black radiance gleamed on Ao Kuei's body. Then, a light flashed on his legs, and they turned into a long snake's tail. After that, the spiritual aura he was exuding rose by a big margin once again. He grasped with one hand, and a stream of black light rushed forth into his hands. It condensed into a pitch-black spear that was over 100 feet long. Then, electric arcs began to throb on the surface of that spear. Also, a zi sound started to spread from it which seemed very terrifying. Pang Yu and Yukan's complexion slightly changed, and their bodies simultaneously radiated green and grey radiance respectively. The first move, receive it now. Ao Kuei shouted, and then waved his hand with full force. A large number of electric lights burst forth on the surface of the black electric spear in his hand the next moment. Then, the spear appeared in front of Pang Yu with a loud thunderous sound, and thrust toward her chest. Puff! The black electric spear pierced through Pang Yu's chest, and left a huge wound therein. There was a stunned look on Pang Yu's face, as if she hadn't even reacted yet. The surrounding people's facial expression also greatly changed. A golden light glinted in Shi Mu's eyes, and his face revealed a dubious look. Even Ao Kuei's face couldn't refrain from exposing a startled look. He apparently hadn't expected that he would be able to finish his opponent in just one blow. A smile bloomed on Ao Kuei's face. However, he was about to speak something when his smile abruptly froze. Pang Yu's body suddenly turned into wisps of grey smoke, and got dissipated by a gust of wind. Then, Pang Yu's silhouette emerged almost 100 feet away from her original place. Thank you for letting me evade the first move, Pang Yu stated with a smile. Ao Kuei's complexion darkened like the bottom of a pot. It looked so unsightly that it couldn't be explained in words. Yukan glanced at Pang Yu, and a hint of appreciation flashed through his eyes. Everyone on the city walls issued bursts of cheering sounds in excitement. Excellent illusion technique. Shi Mu muttered to himself. There is nothing special about it. I had already seen through it, Cai whimpered. Really? Your eyesight possesses this kind of ability as well? Shi Mu gave an awestruck look to Cai. Obviously. After all, I'm the most gifted genius of my gossiping parrot race, Cai boasted. Shi Mu didn't know whether Cai's words were true or not. So, he simply ignored them, and looked toward the battle. The second move. Ao Kuei gave a loud shout. He then grasped with one hand, and a black sickle emerged in his hand the next moment. It radiated intense black light. Also, innumerable tiny black magic characters emerged on the surface of the sickle. These characters looked very strange. Ao Kuei's eyes emitted blazing red radiance. At the same time, the sickle in his hand again exuded intense black light. Then, it took Ao Kuei's body as the center, and started to spin around him at lightning speed. Simultaneously, it formed the remnant shadows of the sickle. Consequently, waves of ripples started to emerge in the surrounding void like an undulating surface of the water. And, a dense spiritual aura pervaded the air, and proliferated in all directions. Shi Mu was in the city, but he could also clearly feel this dreadful pressure. His eyes finally revealed a trace of shock. He knew that he might not be capable of resisting such an attack. Go to hell! The black sickle suddenly stopped as Ao Kuei thundered. Then, it inflated and became several dozen times larger than before with a loud droning sound. The massive black sickle streaked across several hundred feet distance in an instant, and appeared over Pang Yu's head once again. Then, the 9 identical illusory images of the massive sickle appeared with a flash of black light. And, they hacked straight toward Pang Yu while drawing a wonderful trajectory in the air. The 9 illusory images of the sickle darted toward her in a manner that sealed up all of her escape routes. In fact, they didn't leave any scope for escape. Pang Yu's facial expression finally changed. But then, innumerable rays of light flashed across her eyes in an instant. Then, the magic wand in her hand ruptured with a bang sound. After that, a ray of light flashed in the void over her head. And, a grayish-black coffin appeared, and covered her entire body. Boom! The 9 illusory images of the sickle dispersed into the air as soon as they slammed into the coffin. Only the real sickle fell on the coffin, and thrust into it with a loud caw sound. However, the sickle stopped into the wood. But then, a plume of grey chi appeared on the surface of the coffin, and wound around the sickle. The sickle had been emitting black light all along. But, that light started to dissipate at lightning speed when it came in contact with the grey chi. The brilliance on the sickle's surface also dimmed a lot as a result. Ao Kuei's facial expression changed as he saw this scene. He hurriedly moved his hand, and recovered the sickle. Then, he poured his magic power into it, and the black sickle slowly returned to its original state. This allowed him to heave a sigh of relief. The fact was that this sickle was a spirit tool. Therefore, it was a precious treasure for him. So much so that he would have preferred to lose this match instead of allowing his sickle any damage. Bright rays of light flashed on the coffin, and it returned to the other world the next moment. Simultaneously, Pang Yu's silhouette came into appearance. However, her complexion looked pale at the moment. It seemed as if a large amount of her magic power had gotten consumed in this magic spell. A startled look flashed through Shi Mu's face. The aura that coffin had been emitting rendered him a kind of spine-chilling sensation. He had felt this kind of aura before. He had felt it around the Demon King Luo Tian. "Dear friend Pang, are you okay?" Yu Qin appeared in front of Pang Yu in a flash and asked. "I'm all right. Watch out." Pang Yu forced a smile to reply. But then, an alarmed look appeared on her face, and she shouted aloud. Yu Qin's facial expression changed, and he quickly whirled around. The huge head of a black python was darting toward him like a small hill. The fact was that Ao Kuei's torso had also transformed into a snake's body by this time. He had taken the form of a massive black python which was thousands of feet long. It seemed as if his gigantic form was connecting the earth to the sky. In fact, his massive body had triggered huge fluctuations in the air when he had moved, like a hurricane. Chapter 315, Plan Changes. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The third move. A dull voice spread from the huge black python's head. Ao Kuei didn't rely on any magic spell or real chi this time. Rather, he had resorted to the most primitive style of attack. But, this attack was the more powerful than the others. Yukan's complexion sank. He issued a loud shout, and a spurt of green radiance burst forth on his body. Then, the shadow of a massive green python emerged behind his body. It was hundreds of feet in size. It then flashed and stood in front of Yukan's body as a shield. Then, a loud bang sound echoed. It was so loud that the earth almost shook. The air issued a thunderous sound by the impact. The green python's magic image collapsed and dispersed as soon as it collided with the body of Ao Kuei's black python. Then, it turned into green fluttering fireflies and drifted away. However, Ao Kuei's body had also halted for a moment by the impact of this collision. As for Yukan, his complexion had turned deathly pale, and a trickle of blood had rolled down the corners of his mouth. However, his facial expression remained unchanged. Suddenly, a golden human-shaped puppet emerged in his hand with a flash of golden light. He then opened his mouth, and spouted a mouthful of blood on the puppet. The blood blended into the human puppet's body, and the puppet's eyes suddenly opened up. Blood-red lights were gleaming in its eyes. In addition, there was an expression in its eyes that was similar to that of a human. A shrill whistling sound spread from the golden puppet's mouth. Then, it started to dazzle with a golden luminescence like that of a small sun. Then, the human puppet's body began to inflate under the golden light at an astonishing speed. It turned into a gigantic silhouette which was nearly 1,000 feet in size, and stood in front of Yukan and Pang Yu as their shield. The massive golden human-shaped puppet looked around. It was a wooden-carved military officer that wore a suit of golden armor. There was no infuriated expression on its face. It was emitting bursts of majestic and dreadful aura. Its overall appearance looked somewhat strange except for its blood-red eyes. Ao Kuei's python head looked like a small hill. The huge head pounded below in a ferocious manner. In this meantime, a long and thick bolt of black lightning spurted out on his head, and wrapped around it. After that, his python head looked like an extremely big and powerful hammer of lightning falling down from the clouds of ninth heaven. A cluster of black thunder balls flew out of Ao Kuei's body at the same time. Then, they started to hover around him in a circle, each one was 10 feet in size. Then, these thunder balls shot towards Yukan and Pang Yu in a manner that made it seem as if these balls had their own intelligence. The thunder balls streaked across the void with a stuffy and droning zhi-zhi sound. It was clear that they were very powerful since they were tearing through the void with ease. Yukan's expression profoundly changed. He waved his hands, and a series of green lights darted into the golden armored puppet's body. The golden armored puppet moved into action, and pounded its two huge fists forward to receive the python's head. Meanwhile, a golden light shone on the surface of its huge fists. This made its fists appear like the sun. On the other side, a glaring green radiance shone on Yukan's body, and took the form of a protective shield. Then, it enveloped him as well as Pang Yu. Boom! A loud and earth-shaking sound of collision rang out. Rays of two colors of light shot up to the sky, one golden and one black. This left the spectators incapable of seeing the situation inside. Then, one black halo and one golden halo proliferated in the surrounding area at a very fast speed. They were surging around in a violent manner like a mighty billowing sea. In fact, a circle of ripples had emerged in the surrounding void, they could even be seen with the naked eye. Also, the surrounding area in the radius of 100 miles revealed a strong earthquake-like vibration. This astounding collision had shaken up the entire peaceful Sun City, so much so that it seemed as if the solid ground of the city had turned into the surface of a raging sea. The waves caused by the two halos pounded against the protective curtain around the city with overwhelming force. This made the protective curtain tremble in a violent manner. Simultaneously, the light flashed crazily on its surface. The light curtain could withstand the impact only for a few seconds. And, a big hole burst open in it with a loud rumbling sound after that. However, the intensity of the halos didn't reduce a bit. Instead, they proceeded to knock against the city walls. Consequently, the solid walls of the city collapsed almost instantaneously. And fragments of bricks scattered in all directions. Many of the surrounding people didn't get enough time to evade it, and got drawn into it. A series of painful screeches started to rise from all directions as a result. Even some low-ranked demon beasts outside the city got pulled into this disaster. After all, they hadn't had any protection in front of them either. In fact, the damage that they suffered was far more serious than that of peaceful Sun City. The fact was that nearly 1,000 low-ranked demon beasts had been engulfed in the aftermath, and had turned into meat pulp in a fleeting moment. Even the high-rise building where Shi Mu stood shook in a terrible manner. But it didn't seem to have any effect on Shi Mu. Conversely, Shi Mu's heart overwhelmed with surging emotions when he witnessed such an intense battle. The strength of both sides involved this battle had exceeded his expectations by far. Shi Mu had experienced several close combats with Earth-ranked powerhouses so far. He had even killed 3 or 4 of them with Yan Luo's assistance. However, the Earth-ranked warriors that he had previously dealt with had been in the primary stages of the Earth rank. But Ao Kuei and Yukin were on a completely different level. In fact, there was a tremendous gap between those Earth-ranked primary stage warriors and these two men. Shi Mu could also reach the Earth rank once he switched into a beast mode through his totem technique. But this only provided him with a short period of explosive strength. So, he couldn't continue to fight for too long in case he bumped into a real confrontation and the battle prolonged. Perhaps, Shi Mu was far from being a proper opponent to any of these two men. Of course, the situation would have been altogether different if Yan Luo agreed to lend a hand in the battle. The Western continent indeed has a good reserve of latent talent. Shi Mu was swaying in the tide of such thoughts. Simultaneously, he was considering his future plans. Outside the city, the black and the golden rays of light finally dimmed, and revealed the situation inside. The golden armored puppet's arms and head had disappeared. Also, several big cracks could be seen all over its huge body. But it had still succeeded in resisting Ao Kuei's attack. On the other side, only a thin layer of the green protective shield had remained around Yukin and Pang Yu. But it had still blocked the bombardment of the thunder balls. Yukin waved his hand, and a cluster of green lights shrouded the two people. Then, they shot 100 or more feet behind, and stood firm. The 3 moves have passed. We were lucky enough to have received all moves successfully. So, I request friend Ao Kuei to keep his promise, Yukin said. The electric lights around the python's huge head had disappeared by now. Also, his scales seemed to have suffered some damages. The gigantic python took a glimpse of the two people, and a faint radiance flickered in his eyes. What? Could it be that Your Excellency wants to renege on his words? Yukin's cold voice spread. Then, he slipped his hand into his sleeve. Pang Yu's facial expression had also returned to normal by now. She stood beside Yukin with vigilant eyes. Also, her body was radiating bursts of grey light. A ray of light flickered in Ao Kuei's eyes. Then, a black light flashed on his body, and his huge snake torso started to shrink at lightning speed until it returned to the human form. Humph! I will respect my promise since you've received all 3 of my moves, Ao Kuei said in a cold manner. Then, he turned around and flew away. The crowd of demon beasts below saw this scene, and went after him in succession. They soon disappeared into the distant horizon, like a furious dragon drifting far away. Yukin finally heaved a sigh of relief. He then waved his hand, and shot out a streak of green light. A light flashed on the golden armored puppet that was in a severely damaged state. It started to reduce in size at an extremely fast speed until it resumed its original shape. However, the surface of its body had almost damaged, and there was not the slightest trace of golden light on it. So, Yukin would obviously have no other choice but to discard it as scrap. He let out a sigh in his heart. Then, he collected the golden puppet, and flew back to the city with Pang Yu. Everyone in the peaceful Sun City burst into cheers as they saw them return. They started to praise both the Golden Crown City Lord and Pang Yu. Good! We won! Cai also shouted in excitement. Shi Mu also felt much relief when he saw the outcome of the battle. He then flew down the building, and disappeared into the crowd. He reappeared on a small street after some time. Shi Tiu, that snake demon has retreated. What's our next plan? Do you want to seize this opportunity to step out of the city? Cai asked. Yes, the snake demon has retreated. But, there's no guarantee that the snake demon won't come back again. I naturally want to leave this land of self-righteousness as soon as possible. But, we can't leave this place right away, Shi Mu replied. What do you mean? Cai didn't understand the meaning of his words. Let's find a place to stay first. We will leave from here after 3 days, Shi Mu pondered for a moment before he said. Cai naturally had no objection to this plan. Shi Mu swept his gaze over the excited crowd on the street. Then, he threw a glance at Pang Yu and Yuken in midair. After that, he turned around, and walked toward the depths of the street. The second day. There was a small inn somewhere in a remote side of the peaceful Sun City. A certain room's window on the second floor was shoved open. It revealed a person's silhouette. It was Shi Mu. He took a long and deep breath while looking at the street outside through the window. Most of the pedestrians on the street were in a hurry. It was obvious that they had been affected by the siege of the demon beasts yesterday. There were perhaps a lot of people who wanted to leave the peaceful Sun City as soon as possible. The trace of a smile hung on Shi Mu's face. This was even better for him. After all, he could mix in with the crowd, and leave the city once he was assured of his safety. Also, this wouldn't pull people's attention toward him. A burst of wings flapping sound was heard at this moment. Cai was flying over from afar. Shi Mu's brows creased when he noticed a hint of anxiousness on Cai's face. What happened? Shi Mu asked. Shi Tiu, the situation doesn't look good. Many people left the city today as you had anticipated. However, some of them disappeared without any reason right after they left the city, Cai shouted. They disappeared without any reason, Shi Mu nodded in a slow manner. It seemed as if he was thinking of the reasons behind these people's disappearance. All of those demon beasts haven't returned to the swamp of snakes. A large number of them seem to have taken shelter 30 miles away from the city. In fact, some people have even seen that Earth-ranked Dragon General Kui lingering outside the city, Cai said. Shi Mu's complexion sank as he heard these words. This Dragon General is very abhorrent. He had clearly agreed that he would retreat with his army if he lost the bet. How shameless he is! Cai shouted. He is not a shameless person. The demon beasts are only 30 miles away from the city. And, he does comply with the agreement by doing so, Shi Mu forced a bitter smile. This Ao Kui had completely disrupted Shi Mu's plan by popping up. The city lord's headquarters. Yuken was seated on the main seat, and his brows looked tightly knitted at the moment. Pang Yu also sat in the side. Her complexion had regained its original state after she had taken rest. But, she didn't appear to be in a good mood at the moment. Ao Kui is keeping watch 30 miles away from the city. So, we can't say that he has violated the agreement. All we can do is blame yesterday's bet. I couldn't draw up an appropriate bet. Instead, I ended up allowing him to take advantage, Pang Yu said in a self-deprecating tone. Dear friend Pang, you don't have to blame yourself for this. This man seems very crude and careless. However, he has a very sharp and meticulous mind. And, its sharp intelligence is accompanied by an inhuman physical strength. So, we couldn't have done anything even if he had reneged on his promise yesterday, Yuken said. What should we do now? Should we have a talk with Ao Kui again? Pang Yu asked. I'm afraid that it's useless. Aokwe has already abandoned his self-respect since he has resorted to such a rogue move. So, I don't think we would obtain any fruitful results if we were to go there, Yukin said. We are left with no choice in the present scenario. We can only persuade our people to not leave the city for the time being. Aokwe is unlikely to stay there forever. He will eventually return, Yukin said after a momentary hesitation. Pang Yu nodded in a slow manner after she heard the plan. This was the only way they had to deal with the present situation. The city lord's headquarters soon posted a notice in order to notify the people about the situation outside the city. The notice got surrounded by a large number of barbarians and humans right after it was displayed. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that everyone is already aware of the situation outside the city. The people of the demon race are still keeping watch outside the city. So, it is too dangerous to go out of the city at the moment. Therefore, everyone is advised to stay in the city. We won't stop you if you want to leave the city even after knowing the current situation. However, we won't interfere if any mishap befalls on you afterwards. An elder of the fierce snake tribe stood before the public notice, and read in a loud voice. These words had barely faded when they sparked off a tumultuous situation in the surrounding area. Everyone started to talk about this matter. The demon race can't stay outside the city for too long. We will have to endure it for a while for the sake of our own safety, that elder of the fierce snake tribe continued. Shi Mu stood behind the crowd in a hidden corner. He wore a conical bamboo hat on his head in order to cover his face. Cai squatted on his shoulder as usual. He took a glance at the notice. Then, he turned around and walked away. Shi Tou, what should we do now? Cai said. What can be done? We are left with no choice but to stay here for the time being. Shi Mu hesitated a bit. Then, he said. Aokwe stood on guard outside the city. So, Shi Mu couldn't think of rushing out of the city without careful consideration. It would certainly be terrible for him if he were recognized by the opposite party by any means. Therefore, he would rather choose to stay in the city, and try to enhance his strength as far as possible. After all, his prime goal was to head to the rising to the heavens mountain peak, which was the holy land of the demon race. And, this goal seemed too difficult to achieve with his current level of strength. Chapter 316, Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The second day. Shi Mu sat cross-legged on the stone bed in a certain room of the inn. His brows were slightly wrinkled, and there was a thoughtful expression on his face. He had encountered a bottleneck in the practice of the art of accumulating spirit power during these days. But, this bottleneck wasn't the same as the bottlenecks of other cultivation arts. It wasn't that this art was too difficult to practice. However, its practicing speed was awfully slow as described in the ancient book. It was reasonable to say that Shi Mu's spatial attribute induction ability wasn't low. After all, he had obtained 5 degrees in it. However, he estimated that it would be impossible for him to mark an achievement without spending dozens of years of his precious time in practicing. He might ascend to the rank of 4-star magician from the 3-star if he relied on the moon-swallowing art in his dreams. But, it would require several years to achieve that feat. Shi Mu had mastered the way to trigger his dreamland. But, he hadn't fully grasped this technique so far. He had once noticed that the growth rate of the silver crystal in his mind was very slow in his awakened state. In fact, it was far inferior to that of the white ape in his dreamland. He still remembered that day when the white ape had reached the consummate stage of the moon-swallowing art in his dream. It had then absorbed the moonlight essence only for a day. And, the silver crystal had grown to the size of a thumb as a result. But, Shi Mu needed a month of painstaking practice to achieve a similar size. In other words, Shi Mu's practicing speed might undergo an astonishing change if he could perfectly grasp the moon-swallowing art. Shi Mu had also experimented with various methods afterwards, including a change in location, a change in distance from the moon, and so on. But, he had never succeeded in triggering the exact magic technique related to the moon-swallowing art. Moreover, this problem wasn't limited to the moon-swallowing art, since the sun-swallowing art was going through the same issue. Therefore, Shi Mu's practicing speed could increase by leaps and bounds only on one condition: if Yan Luo agreed to extend its support, and continued to provide him a steady flow of that unique green flower which contained a plentiful amount of moonlight essence. But, the major problem was Yan Luo's cold and indifferent response to Shi Mu's summons these days. Therefore, Shi Mu could only wait with patience for Yan Luo to look for him on its own initiative. Shi Mu could also focus his attention on the Book of Flaming Red Ape's practice in order to increase his strength, if he were to rule out the magician's path to enhance his strength for a while. Shi Mu had already practiced to the peak of the 8th stage of the Book of Flaming Red Ape. And, he had achieved this point with the help of the sun-swallowing art in his dream. The only thing he needed now was a fire spirit place. After all, that would enable him to consume the fire attribute Peach King. And then, he could try to break through the advanced stage bottleneck at one fell swoop by drawing support from the abundance of fire attribute spirit energy contained in the Peach King. Shi Mu hadn't been able to find any suitable fire spirit place since he had set foot on the western continent. Therefore, he hadn't consumed the Peach King so far. Was there a fire spirit place in this peaceful Sun City? Shi Mu shook his head in a helpless manner. He then stood up, pushed open the door, and walked out. 3 days later, Shi Mu walked into a family restaurant with Cai. He then sat down on a random seat. Then, a man came over. He appeared to be a waiter of this restaurant. "Sir, what would you like to order?" The waiter served tea to Shi Mu while he was speaking. After that, he stood to one side with a respectful expression on his face. Cai didn't wait for Shi Mu's reply, and shouted first, "Get a few signature dishes along with some barbecue strings that I saw at the entrance. Don't forget to bring 70 or 80 barbecue strings." The waiter saw Cai, and his jaw dropped in astonishment. A few surrounding customers also turned around, and cast surprised glances at them. Shi Mu flicked Cai's head a few times in a stern manner as he saw this. Cai covered his head with his wings, and quieted down. But, he revealed a very aggrieved appearance at the same time. "Get some signature dishes then." Shi Mu took a sip of the tea. The waiter was jolted out of his trance by Shi Mu's words. He then complied repetitively while walking away from their table. However, he then turned his head, and threw a look at Cai. Shi Mu's brows creased. He held the cup, and took a sip of the tea again. It had already been 4 or 5 days since the demon beasts had besieged the city. Shi Mu and Cai had made inquiries everywhere in the city in the past few days to find an appropriate fire spirit place. It couldn't be said that the city didn't have any such place. The fact was that some people had used a great amount of magic power to build a connection with the underground fire reserves. And this had allowed them to build a few fire rooms. These fire rooms were then used for refining tools and pills, and for forging weapons. However, the control of these fire rooms was in the hands of some powerful forces of the city, like the Fierce Snake Tribe, the Dark Moon Cult, and other influential people. So, it was nearly impossible for Shi Mu to rent a fire room due to his present situation. Moreover, those fire rooms were primarily built to facilitate refining pills and tools. So, the intensity of the fire attribute spiritual energy locked up in these rooms might not be able to meet his present requirements. "Shi Tou, don't worry. As they say, everything would be right in the end," Cai said. "You can truly see through me," Shi Mu said while looking at Cai. "You can try to practice other cultivation arts if you can't find a fire spirit place, like the art of accumulating spirit power and the art of breeding strong evil ape," Cai said. Shi Mu's brows twitched upward. He had been so absorbed in finding a fire spirit place these days that he had almost forgotten to inquire about the blood essence of a demon ape. According to the store manager that he had previously met, it was relatively difficult to find a suitable blood essence in the eastern region. But, Shi Mu still planned to visit the other shops in the city. A few barbarians were seated adjacent to Shi Mu. Their indistinct voices surfaced into his ears at this moment. Did you hear that? The Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion intends to hold an auction within a few days. Isn't half a year left before the next auction? Has it been scheduled ahead of time? You must know that our city had been besieged by the demon beasts a few days ago. The rumors state that the city lord has specifically directed to reschedule the auction in order to mobilize the city's emotions. There is also a rumor that city lord Yukin himself intends to sell a lot of good things at the auction. Tisk tisk, this auction will surely unfurl a lot of good things. So, it is definitely worth seeing. It's said that the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion is rich and overbearing. So, they are obviously going to display a lot of top-notch things at the auction. The Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion, Shi Mu's brows wrinkled into a frown. He then got up, and walked away from his table. But, he left Cai on the table so that Cai could feast himself properly. A few of these people were startled when they saw Shi Mu walking toward them. And, they immediately shut their mouths. Does Your Excellency have some business with us? One of them stood up and asked. He was a middle-aged man with a pale complexion. A few people amongst them were weak, and had average cultivations. They were merely Hotian martial warriors. In fact, this middle-aged man was the only strong person in this group. He was at the primary stage of the Xian realm, and was seemingly the leader of this group. Shi Mu had restrained his aura this entire time. But, the imposing aura that could only belong to a Xian middle-stage warrior had begun to lingering around him at this time. And, that was dreadful enough to make these people feel a bit nervous. Friends, don't misunderstand me. I didn't come here with any evil intention. I just happened to overhear a few conversations of yours. And, I wanted to consult you about the auction that you were talking about. Oh, that's right. Waiter, please add my friend's food bill to my account. Shi Mu's words were accompanied by a smile. He then stretched out his hand, and beckoned to the waiter who stood not far from them. These people exchanged glances once when they heard Shi Mu's words. Then, their facial expression loosened a bit. Please have a seat, Your Excellency. The middle-aged man sat down, and pointed his finger at the chair beside Shi Mu. Shi Mu expressed his thanks, and sat down. He then shared his name, but it was obviously a false name. It's nice to meet you, dear friend Mu. Can you possibly be desirous of participating in this auction? The middle-aged man asked. That's right. This Mu is looking for the blood essence of a high-ranked demon ape or demon monkey. Does my friend know whether this auction will have this thing or not? Shi Mu asked. How can this trivial man know about such a matter? My noble friend may go to the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion in order to inquire about this matter, the middle-aged man said with a wry smile. I just listened to your conversation. Is this Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion very powerful? Shi Mu remained silent for a moment. He then asked again. Dear friend Mu doesn't even know about the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion's auction house. The other people exposed a surprised look. This is my first visit to the peaceful Sun City. I had always been in small places before arriving here. Therefore, my shallow knowledge has made you people laugh at me, Shi Mu said. Come on, it's not like that, these people smiled apologetically. Perhaps friend Mu's first visit to our city isn't a strange matter. Anyway, the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion has opened an auction house in the peaceful Sun City in the recent years. They hold auctions every year on a regular basis. And, it is regarded as a big event here. But, this auction house is backed by the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce. Friend Mu must have heard about it, the middle-aged man said. The Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce. Shi Mu was startled. However, he remained calm and composed on the surface, and nodded. Oh, that's right, now you will ask who exactly opened this Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce. But, I've seen their branches in several big cities, a thin barbarian man in the group said. Not only this, it is also said that they still have business contacts with the demon race. It's not simple. Right, I've also heard about it. Shi Mu and the opposite party had a few random discussions in the following time. Shi Mu drew some information about the position of the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion through the discussions. He subsequently took his leave, and hurried outside the restaurant. He hadn't imagined that Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce's influence range could be so mighty that it even had a place of business in the Western continent. Cai had already eaten and drunk to his heart content. The only thing he needed right now was a proper rest. But then, his eyes fell on Shi Mu, who had already reached the entrance of the restaurant, and he rushed to follow him. Shi Tou, why are you in a hurry? I have just finished eating. You should at least allow me to digest my food. Cai landed on Shi Mu's shoulder, and released a contented burp. But, Shi Mu didn't pay attention to him. He walked straight in the direction of the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion. He came to a street within half an hour. This street couldn't be regarded as bustling. There was an ordinary garret in front of him. And, a horizontal board hung on it. It was inscribed with the words Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion. Shi Mu's eyes flickered. It seemed that the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce's work style in the Eastern continent was different from that in the Western continent. Its scope of business wasn't small here. But, it seemed that they preferred to keep a low profile at this place. He hadn't yet entered the shop when a black-robed middle-aged man brushed past him, and walked into the store. There was a hint of anxiousness across his face. Shi Mu also walked into the shop and looked around. He saw that myriads of rare spirits materials and efficacious pills had been arranged in the cabinets. In addition, a few common magic tools could also be seen in the shop. But, they looked very insignificant and unappealing in comparison to the Eastern continent's stock. The present situation allowed Shi Mu to assume that the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion was unlikely to show its real treasure to people casually. A man stood in a corner of the counter. He was seemingly the manager of this store. He was talking to a black-robed man in a whispering voice. This black-robed man was the same man that Shi Mu had seen outside the shop a moment ago. But, Shi Mu could still faintly listen to their conversation with the strength of his spirit sense. Their conversation made it seem as if a batch of the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion's goods had encountered a trouble. Manager, what should we do now? A shipment was robbed again. This gang doesn't seem to respect us at all. They certainly want to create trouble for Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce, the black-robed man whispered. The manager's eyes gradually became darker as he said, how much is the loss? Fortunately, we had Chen Kui transport the goods in batches. So, the loss is permissible. However, it is the third time this has happened in 6 months. First of all, report this matter. Our latest shipments will be suspended for now. We will wait until the matter is settled. The black-robed man disappeared from the shop after some time. The manager had already noticed Shi Mu. So, he came over to him with a smile on his face as soon as he wrapped up the matter at hand. How may I address you, dear guest? Also, may I ask what my dear guest wants to see here? Shi Mu threw a glance at the manager. He then clasped his hands as a sign of respect and said, I'm Mu Shi. I've heard that an auction will be held here soon. So, I came over to see. I wonder if my noble friend can provide a person's name as reference. I don't wish to keep your excellency in dark. Our auctions only aim at our old customers, the manager replied with a smile. This is the first time I've set foot in your respected store. However, I've had some dealings with the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce in the past. I don't know whether those frequent dealings make me an old customer, Shi Mu said. Chapter 317, Fire-Filled Array. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. He, our Heavenly Wu Gem Pavilion has stemmed from the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce. So, friend Mu will obviously be regarded as our old customer if he had been an honored customer of our Chamber of Commerce once. But, can friend Mu show some proof of that? The manager was dumbfounded to hear his words at first. He then nodded and said. Shi Mu had no objection to this. He turned his hand, and took out an orange jade token from his vast earth ring. An 8-faced monster pattern was engraved on the surface of this token. The pattern was exquisitely carved, and looked very lifelike. Shi Mu had received this jade token when he was in the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce's Chuyang City branch. He had entrusted a few tasks to Su Lu there. And, Su Lu had in return sent a person to give this token to Shi Mu after the completion of the task. He had asked Shi Mu to take good care of it. The manager received the jade token, and examined it with great attention. He then raised his head and said, "Yes, it is indeed the VIP token of my Chamber of Commerce. But, it seems that this thing has been issued by one of our Eastern Continent branches. Could it be that Your Excellency has come from the Eastern Continent?" "That's right. I had once been in the Chuyang city of the ancient Xia country for a certain period of time. I had some business dealings with Elder Su Lu there. And, he later bestowed this thing upon me." Shi Mu nodded, and replied. "So, friend Mu is an old friend of Master Su. I'm sorry for not showing due respect to you. My surname is Shi, and I'm the manager of this shop. Friend Mu is our distinguished guest. But, I would still request you to come inside with me for a talk." The manager heard Shi Mu's reply, and became friendlier towards him. Manager Shi turned around, and walked up to a side door in the room. He then turned around, and made a gesture to invite Shi Mu. "You're too courteous," Shi Mu said, and walked into the side door. Manager Shi led Shi Mu to a private room. The decoration of the room looked very simple yet elegant. An attendant served them tea as soon as they reached there. "Can it be that Manager Shi is familiar with Master Su Lu?" Shi Mu asked. "Master Su is an outstanding and well-known expert of refining tools in our Chamber of Commerce. So, I naturally know about him. Besides, Master Su had once come to the Western continent almost 10 years ago. I had consulted with him at that time in order to take some precious refining," Manager Shi replied with a smile. This Mu has heard that the ancient Xia country had gone through a great turmoil some time ago. "I wonder if Manager Shi knows how the situation there is these days," Shi Mu asked. "I think friend Mu is talking about the collaborated attack on the Eastern Dark Moon cult by the Transcending Heaven Immortal cult and the Heavenly Demon sect. I've also heard about that incident. The Eastern Dark Moon cult has been destroyed in its entirety by the two forces. Also, Chuyang City has changed beyond recognition after that incident. It can't be said how many years it might take to restore Chuyang City to its original state," the manager let out a sigh as he said. "Then, the branch of Chamber of Commerce in Chuyang City is also," Shi Mu said. "He, that's not going to happen. Our Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce has been engaged only in business-related things from time immemorial. It has never taken part in the disputes between various forces. Therefore, most of the forces still give a little bit of respect to us. The Chamber of Commerce in Chuyang City is still operating its business as before. Also, Master Su is still blessing us with his presence there," the manager replied with a smile. "So, this is the case. I was very worried about this. The fact is that I didn't come to your store in order to inquire about the auction alone. I also wanted to know whether the task that I had entrusted before has been completed or not," Shi Mu said in a normal way on the surface. But, he had inwardly become even more curious to know about the background of the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce. "Of course, please sit here and enjoy your tea for some time, friend Mu." Manager Shi nodded and walked out of the room with Shi Mu's orange jade token. Shi Mu picked up the cup of tea from the table, and took a sip of it. Meanwhile, a thoughtful look emerged on his face. It seemed as if he was contemplating something. Manager Shi returned after a moment. But, his facial expression looked a little strange this time. "May I know whether my entrusted task has been completed?" Shi Mu's brow wrinkled as he asked. Friend Mu's entrusted task was to deliver a letter to a woman named Zhongshu, wasn't it? Manager Shi asked. "Yes," Shi Mu replied. The records maintained in our books state that this letter has been safely delivered. So, friend Mu can feel relieved, Manager Shi said. That's good. Is it possible to ask your Chamber of Commerce to help me in finding out something again? I want to know about Zhongxiu's present condition. How is she now? Was she also affected by the war? Shi Mu said. This matter is a bit difficult to deal with. I don't know why. But, all information related to this woman has been sealed up by the Chamber of Commerce. I had tried to inquire about her, but found myself unable to pull out any information related to her. Manager Shi looked embarrassed when he said this. Why is it so? Does Manager Shi know the reason behind this step? Shi Mu's brows creased as he asked. I'm sorry. I don't know the reason. I've told you about this in accordance to the records we keep, Manager Shi replied. Shi Mu's brows twitched upward, and he gazed at Manager Shi's appearance. But the manager didn't seem to be lying to him. Is such a situation a common occurrence in your Chamber of Commerce? Or, is there any specific reason that can compel the Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce to seal up a person's information? Shi Mu remained silent for a moment. Then, he asked in a roundabout manner. This situation ought to be very rare. After all, this is the first time this humble man has come across such a situation. I can see that friend Mu wants to know whether Zhongxiu is safe or not. So, I must tell you that you don't have to worry about her safety. There might be something related to the Chamber of Commerce that has led them to conceal all information related to her, Manager Shi said. Isn't there any way to crack the seal of Zhongxiu's information? How many spirit stones do you want for that? Shi Mu still looked reluctant to give up. It's impossible. Our organization's rules are very strict. So, nothing can be done about this sealed information, even if you were to come up with a large number of spirit stones, Manager Shi shook his head. Well, please notify me if there is any change in Zhongxiu's situation. I don't care how many spirit stones are needed, Shi Mu said with a wry smile. It's only natural. So, friend Mu can rest assured. By the way, the Chamber of Commerce is going to hold the auction after 2 days. Friend Mu can come and take part in it if he's interested. This is the entry pass, the manager said while taking out a golden card. Then, he passed that card to Shi Mu. Will there be blood essence of high-ranked apes and monkeys at the auction? Shi Mu asked while receiving the card. The blood essence of apes and monkeys? The list of items that will be displayed at this auction doesn't seem to include this thing, the manager revealed a surprised look first. Then, he shook his head and said. Shi Mu's heart got shrouded with an air of gloominess as he heard the reply. His luck seemed rather awful today since he hadn't heard anything good so far. Shi Mu didn't need to participate in this auction anymore since he wouldn't find the thing that he wanted. He was about to bid farewell to Manager Shi when something crossed his mind. Consequently, his eyebrows creased. He then asked again, there's still one thing on my mind. I wonder if your Chamber of Commerce can help me with this. Friend Mu, please feel free to ask whatever you want. I won't decline you as long as I'm capable enough to do it, Manager Shi said. Mu wants to rent a fire room in this city. I wonder if you can help, Shi Mu asked. A fire room? Such places are basically controlled by the fierce snake tribe or by the Western Dark Moon cult around here. Besides, our Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce isn't involved in weapon forging and pills refining work in this peaceful Sun City. So, please accept my sincere apologies since this humble man can't help you with this matter either, the manager said in an apologetic manner. Isn't your Heavenly Wu Chamber of Commerce considered omnipotent? Shi Tou asked you 3 things back to back. But, all you did was decline every single of them using random excuses. Cai had been waiting on Shi Mu's shoulder quietly since the beginning. However, he suddenly opened his mouth at this time, and shouted at the manager. Manager Shi cast a glance at Cai, and couldn't help exposing an awestruck look on his face. He then considered for a moment and asked. What's the use of a fire room for friend Mew? Can it be that you want to use the room for refining pills and tools? Or do you want it for some other use? Nothing of that sort. I need a fire room solely for my practice. The fact is that I practice a cultivation art that is a bit special, and requires an environment rich in fire attribute spiritual energy, Shi Mu replied. This man has another way to deal with this situation if this is the case. It might work out for you, Manager Shi said. What is that other way? Shi Mu's eyes brightened up. Friend Mu, please wait a moment. Manager Shi turned around, and walked out of the room. He returned after almost a quarter of an hour with a worn-out book in his hand. Friend Mu, please take a look at this book. Shi Mu received the book. Making unusual arrays was mentioned on the cover of this book, a few simple and unadorned ancient characters also reflected in his eyes. He flipped over the pages, and was pleasantly surprised to find that this thin booklet contained various kinds of magic spells. One of them was called the Magic Formula of Fire-Filled Array. This formula stated that a large number of fire attribute stones and fire attribute spirit stones could be used to create an atmosphere that was rich in fire attribute spiritual energy. Also, this formula could form an array which could be placed on par with volcanoes when it came to the intensity of the fire attribute. It is said that a senior member of the Chamber of Commerce wanted to cultivate a kind of high-quality fire attribute spirit grass. So, he did a thorough research in order to create an appropriate environment artificially. This formula was the outcome of his research. However, the amount of resources needed for this work was excessively large. In fact, the percentage of loss was far beyond that of the gain. So, this formula was eventually dropped. It's good that this formula has been handed down to us. And, I think that it should be able to serve friend Mu's purpose, the manager said. This fire-filled array is truly very useful to me. May I ask the number of spirit stones needed in exchange for this ancient book? Shi Mu asked. The magic formulas recorded in this book making unusual arrays are rather obsolete and unpopular. In fact, it hasn't been asked for since many years. But, it seems to be useful to friend Mu. So, this humble man can give it to you for only 500 spirit stones, Manager Shi said. Shi Mu readily paid the 500 spirit stones. Then, he departed from Heavenly Wu Gem Pavilion. He was so impatient that he started to study the fire-filled array as soon as he returned to his dwelling place. The book stated that the number of fire star stones and fire attribute spirit stones required to complete the formation of this magic array was indeed unimaginable. But, this would surely form a rich degree of fire spirit energy. In fact, it would be as rich as a fire spirit place when it came to the intensity of it. However, the fire attribute spirit stones Shi Mu had in his stock were far below the minimum requirement for this magic array. The fire attribute stones were primarily used to stabilize this magic array, and prevent the fire energy from over-dissipating. It could be said that the price was acceptable, but the required quantity was still excessively huge. So, he must have a large amount of money to gather these spirit stones. In addition, a massive consumption of fire attribute spirit stones was also needed to complete this array. However, Shi Mu had squandered most of his savings these days. And, the little savings that he was left with could support him for only a small period of time. Shi Mu was trapped in this city for now, and he had no idea how long it would take to get out of here. But, it would be worth it if he could make a fire room and begin the practice of the Book of Flaming Red Apes 8th stage. Therefore, Shi Mu had to find a suitable place to make a fire room on priority basis. He found a remote and secluded house in the city after 2 days with the help of a real estate agent. This house was situated in the northern region of the city. It was fairly large in size, but its price was considerably low. This house is the perfect place for Senior Mu. It can satisfy all of Senior's requirements. In addition, this house is located far from the city. So, there will be no one to disturb you, the grey-dressed man said. This man's facial expression gave off an impression of a very cunning and sly man. However, he displayed a rather warm and cordial approach toward Shi Mu. Shi Mu took a glance at the abandoned house once, and then nodded. It didn't matter to him whether this place was remote or not. All he wanted was a place where he could practice without being disturbed. This is it, Shi Mu said at a glance. He then paid the agent the spirit stones. The grey-dressed man's face glinted with happiness. He received the spirit stones, and then hurried away. Shi Tou, you know that this is a haunted house. So, why do you want to take it? Cai stood on Shi Mu's shoulder. He then said timidly while looking left and right. It's cheap and secluded. There is a ghost, did you know that? I will catch the ghost if there is one. Besides, I have you by my side. What? Do you want me to help you in capturing the ghost? I might not be able to do this thing, can't do. That's even better. We'll stay here together with that ghost. I don't mind. I think you've lost your mind. Shi Mu was taking pleasure in teasing Cai. Simultaneously, he was observing the house. There was a rumor attached to this house. It was said that many of the people who had lived here had disappeared very mysteriously. Consequently, a rumor had gradually spread in the vicinity that this house was possessed by an evil spirit. Such rumors obviously didn't have any effect on Shi Mu. However, these rumors seemed very vivid and realistic. So, Shi Mu was rather enjoying teasing and frightening Cai since the parrot was quite a coward. Chapter 318, An Entirely Different World. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. This was a south-facing house. It had a normal square-shaped structure, but it looked somewhat dilapidated. However, the house looked fairly normal apart from that. It didn't seem to have any issue like the floating rumors suggested. Shi Mu had barely set foot in the courtyard when he felt as if a kind of cold and evil aura had pervaded the entire surrounding space. Shi Mu was walking around in the courtyard in a casual manner when Cai suddenly shouted. "Mommy! What's wrong?" Shi Mu asked. "Shi Tou, that, there is some problem with the room over there." Cai pointed to an independent room in the southeast corner of the courtyard. Oh! Shi Mu looked in that direction, and his heart skipped a beat. The structure of the room clearly appeared inharmonious with the main house. It seemed that it was reconstructed after the courtyard was built. In addition, the room's door was locked. Shi Mu's brows snapped into a frown, and he released a wisp of his spirit sense to probe around. He sensed that a wisp of cold and evil aura was diffused in the air. And, the source of this aura seemed to be somewhere in this room. "Shi Tou, I'll go and be on the lookout for you." Cai fluttered his wings and flew to the top of a tall tree in the courtyard when he saw Shi Mu's posture. After all, it seemed that Shi Mu wanted to enter the room. But, Shi Mu didn't pay any attention to him. He walked forward, and gave the door a gentle push. The door's lock fell down, and the door was pushed open. A whiff of cold and evil aura hit him in his face the next moment. This aura was far stronger than the aura he had felt before. Shi Mu swept his gaze around the room. The interior of the room appeared simple and crude. It was no better than any ordinary room. In fact, there was nothing special about this room. Shi Mu sank into a momentary consideration. Then, he took a step and went into the room. He then turned around in the room, and his brows suddenly twitched. Then, he opened his mouth. A golden sword light darted out of his mouth. Simultaneously, Shi Mu's fingers moved to cast a sword dart, and the golden sword banged straight against the floor in a certain corner of the room. Bang! The floor's flagstone blew up, and revealed a big jet-black hole. A strong and cold aura gushed out of the hole. The intensity of this aura was several times stronger than the aura that Shi Mu had felt in this room. Shi Mu arrived by the side of the big hole, and looked downwards. But, all he could see below was endless darkness. However, such darkness was no big deal for him as per his present eyesight. The pupils in Shi Mu's eyes turned golden. And, a fairly spacious basement appeared before his eyes the next moment. A glimmer of happiness flashed through his face as he saw this. He had been planning to build a basement somewhere around. But, he hadn't thought that there could be a completely different world under this house. Moreover, this meant that he had a ready-made basement at his disposal. Therefore, Shi-Mu decided to make a proper survey of this basement. After all, he knew that it would save him a lot of time and trouble if he didn't find any issue with this place. Shi-Mu jumped in and landed in an underground stone room as these thoughts flashed through his mind. A whiff of bone-chilling air welled up from all sides the next moment. It was mingled with a faint smell of blood. A layer of red light bubbled up on Shi-Mu's entire body. And, this reduced that chilling feeling to a great extent. However, it must be said that these signs suggested that those rumors weren't groundless. There was indeed some problem with this place. Shi-Mu took a step and walked forward. But, he had hardly taken a few steps when several holes suddenly split open in the surrounding ground, and several blood-red rattans broke out of them. The sudden occurrence caught Shi-Mu off guard, and tied down his feet all at once. After that, an overwhelming suction force fell upon him. It seemed that it wanted to drag him away. Shi-Mu's body swayed a little, but there wasn't even a trace of apprehension in his eyes. His feet exerted full force, and clung to the ground in a firm manner. And, his body didn't budge after that. Puff puff. The ground shook, and 7 or 8 blood-red rattans again darted out of the ground. They pounced straight towards Shi-Mu while making threatening gestures. Shi-Mu flicked his fingers, and the golden sword shot out once again. It turned into a massive golden sword shadow, and started to hover around his body. Consequently, the rattan that had tied down his feet were cut off in a matter of seconds along with the ones that were about to attack him. And, a spurt of blood like bright red and viscous fluid burst forth from the severed rattans. Then, stuffy and rumbling sounds spread from the floor. And, more blood-red rattans emerged out of it. There were almost 50 or 60 of them this time. They rushed toward Shi-Mu from every direction as soon as they appeared. Shi-Mu pinched his fingers to cast a spell. Simultaneously, he mumbled something, and the golden sword inflated to the size of a door's plank. Then, the large sword quivered in a fierce manner. After that, dozens of densely packed golden sword lights burst out with a chi-chi sound. They then transformed into thin sword shadows, and dispersed in all directions. The entire basement dazzled with golden light as the sword shadows flew everywhere in a crisscross pattern. A bright red liquid splattered in the air wherever the sword shadows went. The 50 or 60 blood-red rattans were cut off in a matter of few breaths. Not a single one of them had been able to approach Shi-Mu's body. The floor had almost turned into a pool of blood. However, Shi-Mu hadn't even heaved a sigh of relief when the floor of the entire basement suddenly cracked and caved in. Shi-Mu was again caught off guard, and fell down along with the floor. He issued a low shout while he was falling, and a wisp of blue light departed from his body. It transformed into a blue jade shuttle, and appeared under his feet to support his body. The surrounding gravels continued to fall for a few breaths before they eventually stopped. Then, a huge hole burst open in the ground once again. It was several feet in size. And, Shi-Mu fell into an even deeper underground cavern. The bone-chilling air in the surrounding was pressing. Shi-Mu felt the slight chill in the air seeping into his skin even though he had stimulated the operation of fire spirit real chi to protect his body. He looked around, and couldn't refrain from revealing a flabbergasted look on his face. He saw a huge blood-red rattan-like monster. It had occupied a rocky wall of the cavern. This blood-red monster was hundreds of feet in size. And, 100 or more blood-red rattan tentacles were growing all over its huge body. There were also a few blood-red flowers in the middle of its body. In addition, a circle of teeth could be seen in the place where its stamen was located. However, a part of this monster's tentacles had already been cut off by the golden sword a moment ago. And, a blood-red liquid was gurgling out of the severed parts at the moment. It seemed that this injury had affected its strength rather considerably. Suddenly, the blood-red rattan monster revealed a pair of pale blue eyes in the center of its body. The blue eyes looked at Shi Mu, who was floating in the air, and an ominous glint flashed across them. The monster issued a loud and hoarse cry, and its blood-red flowers shone with magnificent red radiance. Then, the flowers' petals swirled out of the monster's body and shot straight toward Shi Mu. It seemed as if innumerable sharp arrows had left the bowstring. Shi Mu's complexion changed. He pointed his hand, and the golden sword gleamed with a magnificent golden light. Then, a burst of golden light gushed out, and knitted a widespread net in front of Shi Mu to act as a shield. The blood-red petals shattered into countless pieces, and showered down like a white expanse blood rain as soon as they came in contact with the golden sword net. In fact, not even a single petal was able to pass through the net. Shi Mu's face got smeared with a hint of satisfaction as he saw this scene. Shi Mu had restored most of the golden sword's strength by now. He had been nurturing it in the warmth inside his body for a while now. Therefore, the golden sword seemed to have become substantially powerful. Suddenly, a muffled sound spread from the ground under his feet. Then, 3 blood-red Kerala's burst out of the ground, and made a biting gesture toward Shi Mu, like 3 big wide-open mouths. Moreover, each one was a few feet in size. In addition, a thick and sturdy blood-red vine also extended from the ground. It was connected to the blood-red Keralas from below. Shi Mu was still floating on the blue jade shuttle. There wasn't a trace of startled look on his face. He flicked his sleeves, and 3 big fireballs emerged before his body. Each one was almost the size of a lower millstone. Then, those fireballs darted out straight toward these 3 blood-red Keralas. It seemed as if they had their own eyes, and had set their attentions on the Keralas. The Keralas felt the scalding heat of the fireballs, and quickly moved aside to dodge them. But, the fireballs were very persistent. They also changed their direction, and relentlessly chased after the Keralas. Boom! A powerful collision occurred between the 2 sides the next moment. The 3 Keralas were burnt black to varying degrees. They appeared to be in an extremely miserable state at the moment. Meanwhile, Shi Mu pointed his hand, and a golden light flashed on the surface of the golden sword. And then, the golden sword turned into a golden virtual shadow, and hacked towards the blood-red rattan monster's main body like a thunderbolt. The blood-red rattan monster was shocked to see this. So, it pulled all of its rattans in front of its body in order to resist the attack. Simultaneously, a spurt of blood-red fog gushed out its body, and condensed into a blood-red fog screen in front its body. Shi Mu let out a cold snort as he saw this. He then mumbled something, and waved his hand a few times. The speed of golden shadow took a sudden leap in response. Then, it flashed and submerged into the blood-red rattan. Several gigantic golden sword chis emerged the next moment. They then hacked at the rattan both vertically and horizontally. Consequently, the entire underground cave seemingly got flooded with golden sword shadows for a moment. A loud wailing sound rang out in the underground cave. And, a blood-red liquid splattered on the ground at the same time. It turned out that the tentacles of the blood-red rattan monster had scattered everywhere after being chopped into several pieces. The scattered parts of its body twitched a few times before they turned completely motionless. Shi Mu stimulated the movement of the blue jade shuttle, and slowly landed on the ground. Suddenly, the ground in the vicinity of the rattan monster burst open. And several white skeletons were revealed as a result. The appearances of these skeletons made it seem as if some of them were beast skeletons. However, the majority of them were human skeletons. Shi Mu had grasped the crux of the story in an instant. This rattan monster was the one who had killed all these people. And, this was why this house was considered haunted. This rattan monster wasn't very formidable. However, it had an extremely favorable location to draw support from while launching its sudden attacks. Therefore, not even Xian Tian warriors or star-ranked magicians could guard against this monster, let alone Ho Tian-ranked ordinary martial warriors. Consequently, many people had fallen prey to it. Shi Mu sighed and gathered these skeletons in one place for a proper burial. He then gazed into the depths of the underground rocky cavern, and a hint of curiosity glinted in his eyes. The underground cavern appeared very deep at a glance. Also, the walls of the cave were emitting a pale green light. These features made this cave appear like naturally formed cave. His eyes flickered, and he walked towards the depths of the cave. His plan was to use this place for his seclusion practice from now on. So, he naturally wanted to explore every inch of this place before taking that step. The road to the underground cavern was rather complicated with lots of twists and turns. Also, the cave gradually became wider. In fact, it looked very spacious after he had covered 100 or more feet of distance towards its depths. Shi Mu had walked over 100 feet further when he saw that the underground cave had reached its dead end. The fact was that it was a small cave that was hardly a few hundred feet in size since its dead end had already arrived. Shi Mu sized up the surrounding area, and couldn't help but expose an astounded look on his face. He saw that a round stone table was set up in the middle of the ground at the end of this cave. And, a few rough stone benches were arranged beside it. In addition, a white corpse sat upright on one of the stone benches, its body rested against the corner of the stone table. The structure of this skeleton looked very broad. It should have been a great figure before its death. After all, it was emitting a majestic aura even though it had died long ago. A green cloak was draped over its body. That cloak was damaged, but it was still emanating a faint green radiance. Shi Mu was shocked to see all these things. He let out a soft breath, and allowed himself to calm down after a moment. Then, he walked to the side of the corpse in a slow and cautious manner. Fortunately, nothing strange happened. Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he stood beside the corpse, and sized it up. The other clothes on the corpse's body had already decayed. However, the green cloak was still in a good condition, except for a few big holes. The positions of these big holes happened to be on the chest and the abdomen of the corpse. A few bones were also broken in those two areas. Shi Mu nodded. Apparently, this person had been pierced to death by some kind of a weapon. After all, such places were convenient to inflict fatal injuries. An idea popped into his mind, and he released his spirit sense towards the corpse in order to examine it. However, the green cloak emanated a faint green light as soon as his spirit sense touched it. And then, Shi Mu's spirit sense was dispelled by a gentle force that had seeped out of the cloak. Shi Mu's face got suffused with a look of astonishment when he noticed this. He then picked up the green cloak in a careful manner. The cloak felt cold and smooth to the touch. In fact, it seemed as if he was touching a liquid. His face beamed with exultation since he had noticed that this cloak was a treasure that could dispel an opposing caster's spirit sense. Shi Mu could put it on to conceal himself. Then, the other people wouldn't be able to discover him even if they probed with their spirit sense. However, it was very unfortunate that there were several big holes in this cloak. And, this meant that it couldn't be used until he had found someone who could mend it. Chapter 319, Arranges the Array and Breaks Through. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. This thing should have a background. It's a pity that it's in a damaged state at present. Anyway, I'll think about it later, Shi Mu muttered to himself in a soft yet regretful voice. He then folded the green cloak in a gentle and cautious manner, and collected it in his vast earth ring. After that, he directed his gaze at the corpse once again. And, his facial expression somewhat changed. He hadn't examined the corpse in a proper manner before since the cloak had blocked his vision. But, he could clearly see a baby's fist-sized crystal stone in the corpse's hand when he examined the corpse again. The entire body of the crystal stone was deep red and transparent. Shi Mu beckoned, and the crystal stone flew into his hand. The crystal stone was conical in shape, and a few quirky patterns were engraved on its surface. In addition, a few quivering red lines could clearly be seen in the center of this crystal stone. These lines were moving up and down the stone like a few red lightning bolts. This crystal stone was evidently not an ordinary thing. However, it was neither emitting any spiritual aura nor any magic power waves. This made it look no different than an ordinary red crystal stone. Shi Mu flipped the crystal stone, and examined it minutely for a long while. His eyes somewhat congealed as he did so. An ancient symbol 3 was engraved on the surface of the cone's peak, as if this stone had been numbered. His brows creased, and he examined it several times in a row. He even attempted to infuse his magic power or real qi into it. However, he couldn't find any special features of this conical crystal no matter how hard he tried. However, the corpse had held this thing tightly in its hand till its death. And, this left Shi Mu to assume that it ought to be an important thing. Shi Mu shook his head, and decided to not think about it at this time. He received the conical crystal, and decided to examine it in his leisure time. There was no other noticeable stuff on the corpse apart from the green cloak and the conical crystal. He looked at the corpse, and let out a soft sigh. He then thought to give it a proper burial in the same place where it had embraced its death. It could be regarded as a compensation for taking away 2 things from its body. Shi Mu flicked his sleeve, and a streak of red light flew out. It wrapped around the corpse, and tried to hold it up. However, the light couldn't pick it up. In fact, it was barely able to budge it. A hint of amazement flashed through Shi Mu's face. The outward appearance of the corpse didn't make it seem special. But it seemed that it was almost 400 or 500 pounds heavy. Shi Mu added a little more force in order to lift the corpse. But then, his brows wrinkled, and the thought of re-examining the corpse flashed across his mind. Then, a dignified look gradually appeared on his face after some time. The fact was that the green cloak and the deep red crystal stone had drawn most of his attention. So, he had overlooked the anomaly in this corpse. Every bone of this corpse was white in color. However, Shi Mu noticed that the texture of these bones was very exquisite when he carried out a proper examination of the corpse once again. Moreover, there was a hint of metallic luster on the bones. He tapped his finger on the skeleton, and a thud-thud sound spread from the bones, as if he was hitting a steel plate. Shi Mu's eyes flickered once. He flicked his fingers, and a streak of red light darted out of them. Then, that streak of light changed into a light blade, and pounded on the thigh bone of the skeleton. A stuffy clang sound was heard, and the red light blade collapsed and dispersed. However, the surface of the thigh bone didn't sustain any damage. In fact, the light blade couldn't even leave a trace on the bone. Shi Mu's complexion changed again. He knew that he had used only a little part of his strength to hit the skeleton. But, his light blade was still formidable enough to chop down an ordinary steel bar. However, it had failed to leave even a tiny scratch on this skeleton. He hesitated for a moment. Then, he received the skeleton in his storage ring. This corpse was definitely an extraordinary thing. So, he thought that he might find something about it during his next examination. Shi Mu walked around in the underground cave for some time, and his eyes gradually brightened. He noticed that the space in the depths of the underground cave was moderate in size. So, it was suitable for making a fire room. Shi Mu then cleared up the severed parts of the rattan monster which were scattered everywhere in the underground cavern. After that, he returned to the surface. Shi Tou, why did you take so long? I thought something unpleasant had happened to you below. In fact, I was about to go down to look for you. Cai fluttered his wings, and flew over as soon as Shi Mu got out of the room. Oh, weren't you scared of the ghost? The corners of Shi Mu's mouth slightly curled as he said. Well, this. I thought that I couldn't defeat this ghost if it was fierce. And, running away would be out of the question. After all, I have wings to fly. By the way, can the ghost fly? Cai's facial expression looked somewhat flustered as he heard the word ghost. And, he started to talk in an incoherent manner. Shi Mu smiled. But, he didn't try to poke fun at the parrot again. He instead recounted the entire matter in the basement in a simple manner. So, This ghost turned out to be a flower demon, and its hideout was the basement. I thought it was truly a ghost. I was scared out of my wits. Cai heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he patted his chest with one of his wings and said, "This is a remote place. So, powerful identities are unlikely to come here." This had provided the flower demon with a suitable situation to harm a lot of people in order to strengthen its power very rapidly. It's estimated that this fierce demon would have advanced to the Earth rank in another 3 or 5 decades if nobody had gone below to deal with it, Shi Mu said. Quack, it doesn't matter what made this monster this way. The important point here is that this monster's play finally came to an end after he provoked Shi Tou, Cai said. The environment here isn't bad. And, there's an underground cavern that can be converted into a fire room. Moreover, we don't have to be worried about being noticed by people here, Shi Mu said. Cai nodded repeatedly. I have set my mind on this place. So, I now need to go and purchase the required number of starfire stones. In addition, I have to exchange my spirit stones for fire attribute spirit stones, Shi Mu said while gazing into the distance across the courtyard. Shi Mu walked around in the peaceful Sun City for the next half-month, and bought many starfire stones. In addition, he exchanged his other spirit stones for the fire attribute spirit stones. The fire attribute spirit stone was a valuable stone. After all, it was classified as one of the 5 elements of spirit stones. Shi Mu had conveniently obtained plenty of these spirit stones in exchange for a little cost and some handling charges. As for the starfire stone, it wasn't regarded as an unusually rare thing. But, the quantity required for the array wasn't small. On top of that, the city was closed up these days. Therefore, it had taken Shi Mu a lot of time and effort to obtain these stones. The fact was that Shi Mu had eventually entered into a deal with Heavenly Wu Gem's pavilion. He had spent an amount of spirit stones that was 30% more than the market value. But, he had succeeded in collecting the required number of starfire stones in this way. However, this deal had costed him the thousands of the spirit stones he had collected so far. And now, he was left with a very small number of spirit stones. Some demon beasts still lingered outside the city under Ao Kuei's guidance. And, their intention was to cause an all-day panic situation in the peaceful Sun City. Shi Mu was naturally too disinclined to pay attention to these things. After all, he was in the midst of arranging his fire-filled array at the moment. He had chosen the deepest part of the underground cavern for setting up this magic array. The ground and walls of this place were densely inlaid with deep red stones. These stones were the starfire stones. These starfire stones were embellishing the entire cave with a bright red hue. Also, they seemed to have formed a huge and indistinct cage. This cage enveloped the entire space on this side of the cave. Circles of vein-like red lines were engraved on the surface of these starfire stones. And, they constituted all kinds of abstruse patterns. There was a circular magic array in the center of the cavern. The fire attribute spirit stones were embedded in each corner of this magic array. They appeared to be several hundred in number. Shi Mu sat down in the center of the magic circle with his legs crossed. He then placed a fire attribute spirit stone on the ground. Buzz! A dazzling red light emerged from the magic array along with a droning sound. It moved along the veined lines in the cavern at an extremely quick speed, and then immediately dissipated. A blissful expression peeped through Shi Mu's face when he saw that the fire-filled array had been laid out successfully. This magic array isn't that difficult to arrange. You could have arranged it all by yourself even if you weren't an expert formula magician. It's just that this magic array is obviously a bit rough in design. In addition, it demands myriads of spirit stones, which could have sufficed me for a long time otherwise, Cai said. He stood beside him on a big stone. Cai, you come and design this magic array in a manner that can save us a lot of spirit stones. Then, I'll turn over the spirit stones that you'd save to you. How is this plan? Shi Mu said. Haha, I was just saying. You don't have to take it seriously, Shi Tou, Cai's voice was filled with resentment. Shi Mu was annoyed, and he shot a glaring look at Cai. He then took a long and deep breath. Then, he flicked his hand, and cast a magic spell. A burst of buzz sound was heard. And, the fire-filled array was set in motion. The fire attribute spirit stones on the ground lit up, and radiated rays of red light. They enveloped the entire underground space in a layer of red light. Then, it seemed as if the underground space had instantly been teleported to a torrid head volcano. An intense fire attribute spiritual energy had pervaded the air in the cavern. The atmosphere in this underground cavern wasn't the same as the one in that natural fire spirit mountain ranges. But, this difference wasn't big enough to be of concern. However, the spiritual energy of the fire attribute spirit stones on the ground was weakening little by little. In fact, it seemed from this trend that these spirit stones would hold this magic array only for 4 or 5 days. Shi Mu revealed a wry smile, and glanced at the ring on his hand. It seemed that the fire attribute spirit stones that he had prepared could be used for replacement only for 4 or 5 times if this speed of depletion continued. So, he needed to think of a way to earn some spirit stones if he wanted to use this array. He sucked in a deep breath and closed his eyes. Then, he started the operation of the Book of Flaming Red Ape. Shi Mu was bathing in the rich fire attribute spirit energy when a wisp of scalding air current gushed into his body in a steady manner. Then, that air current seeped into his meridians. He sensed this, and took out an ordinary fire attribute peach fruit from his clothes. The surrounding red light converged over the next moment, and gradually formed a layer of red clouds on his body. Some time passed. In fact, 10 or more days passed in this way. Shi Mu abruptly opened his eyes as he sensed that his real chi had reached the peak. He was still seated in the center of the magic array. He turned his hand, and took out the fire attribute Peach King. He pondered for a moment. Then, he swallowed down the entire fruit in a few gulps. He felt a sudden surge of heat wave in his lower abdomen as the Peach King reached his stomach. After that, his entire body was shrouded in a layer of red radiance and a layer of purple radiance. Then, a wisp of his real chi started to rush forth in his meridians in a very swift manner. And, it became increasingly fierce with each passing second, as if furious waves were surging continuously. Shi Mu then felt a lacerating pain in his meridians. He felt as if his meridians were being cut by an incisive knife. This rendered him bursts of excruciating pain. He took a deep breath, and barely managed to pacify the surging chi and blood in his body. After that, he stimulated the operation of the Chi Palace in his body in the light of the magic art of the Book of Flaming Red Ape's 9th stage. He felt that the real Chi in his lower abdomen had made a sharp growth in a matter of seconds. Then, a wisp of his plentiful real Chi gushed out of his lower abdomen, and circulated in all of his limbs and bones, like a turbulent current. However, the red light in the fire-filled array had also begun to flicker every now and then. Shi Mu was perspiring profusely. The surface of his skin had become reddish-purple. In addition, his meridians and lower abdomen were flooded with intense real chi at the moment. In fact, they had almost reached a zero scope, so much so that it seemed that they were about to explode. He opened his eyes. And, the reddish-purple radiance on his body shone, and wrapped his entire body. A long time had passed like this. Then, Shi Mu suddenly issued a long and loud scream. His scream reverberated throughout the underground cave. The surrounding magic array seemed to be affected by this, and exuded dazzling rays of light. Innumerable rays of red light started to converge in Shi Mu's body the next moment. It seemed like 100 rivers were converging into an ocean. Simultaneously, the oppressive force in Shi Mu's body started to become stronger. Cai stood nearby in the cavern. This mighty coercion whistled over him, and shook him to fly. He couldn't help but utter a strange scream as a result. Then, a layer of black light emerged in the ceiling of the underground cavern, and blocked the waves of spirit power that Shi Mu was releasing. This process lasted for 3 full days and 3 full nights. Then, the red light in the magic array slowly faded, and revealed Shi Mu's silhouette inside. Shi Mu appeared to be soaked in sweat at the moment. It seemed as if he just had been picked up from the water. However, a gleam of excitement could be seen all over his face. The fact was that he had finally broken through the 8th stage of the Book of Flaming Red Ape, and had stepped into the 9th stage. Moreover, the Qi palace in his body was bulging with a plentiful amount of real Qi. And, this real Qi was in concentrated form at the moment. In fact, it seemed as if his real Qi had almost condensed into a liquid. Also, it felt almost twice more powerful than before. All these signs indicated that he had officially entered the advanced stage of the Xian Tian realm. Chapter 320, Resumes Old Profession. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu returned to his house outside the cavern. He swept his gaze around, and his eyes fell on a black stone room at the edge of the house. He stimulated the real Qi in his body, and pounded his fist in the void. And, a fist shadow that was curled up in a blazing red flame got condensed in the air out of nowhere the next moment. Then, it bombarded on that stone room while carrying a luminous and scorching wave. A loud bang sound echoed. Fragments of stone scattered. And, a big hole which was a few feet in size burst open in a wall of the room. In fact, this hole was so deep that the opposite side of the wall had also been pierced through. Shi Mu's heart brimmed with exultation. His strength had made a phenomenal progress ever since he had stepped into the Xian Tian advanced stage. His fist had made a hole through the wall even though he had casually stimulated his real Qi and released it out of his body through his fist. This indicated that his fist had become as solid as iron. In fact, it now had the ability to pierce through a 1-foot-thick stone wall. However, his brows snapped into a frown, and he closed his eyes to sense something. He opened his eyes after a moment, and waved his sleeves while reading an incantation. A series of red lights flashed in front of his body. It was a group of 6 fireballs which had just darted out of his body, each one was the size of a wash basin. They dashed forward, and bombarded the stone room like a meteor. A burst of intense rumbling sound rang out along with scalding flame and light. The stone room revealed a violent vibration in response. Then, an expansive layer of stone fragments curled up in blazing flames scattered in all directions. The stone room was left with myriads of holes in an instant. It could stay firm for only a few seconds, and eventually collapsed with a loud rumble. A gleam of satisfaction flashed through Shi Mu's face as he saw this situation. He noticed that the strength of his magic power hadn't improved by a lot. However, the might of his fireball technique had marked a substantial growth from before. Shi Mu made a careful investigation, and found the reason for this attainment. He found that his fire element induction strength had increased by leaps and bounds along with his breakthrough to the 9th stage of the Book of Flaming Red Ape. He had now almost attained 6 degrees in the fire element induction force. And, this degree was far stronger than his spatial element induction force. He could now distinctly sense the fire attribute element contained in the air if only he closed his eyes. In addition, he could now freely mobilize these elements, and launch real Qi or magic power attacks as well. The reason why Shi Mu had been able to make such an astonishing attainment was the fire attribute Peach King. It could be said that the Peach King had a major contribution to his success. No wonder the formidable Earth-rank powerhouses were battling against each other in order to obtain this fruit. Shi Tou, your strength seems to have made an unimaginable progress after your breakthrough. Cai flew over from afar at this moment. Cai had been idle during the period of Shi Mu's seclusion practice. So, he had come forward of his own accord, and said that he would be on the lookout for Shi Mu. He had obviously done so because he was getting bored. What is the situation outside the city now? Shi Mu asked. It is reported that Ao Kuei hasn't shown up for a while. However, those demon beasts are still wandering around in the vicinity, Cai said. Shi Mu nodded. He then turned around and walked toward the underground cave. Cai also followed him. Shi Mu was in the fire-filled array after some time. He looked around, and couldn't help exposing a wry smile. He had already replaced the fire attribute spirit stones in the array a number of times during this period of his seclusion practice. And, the last batch of the spirit stones had also been consumed to a great extent by now. Therefore, their radiance had dimmed a lot. Shi Mu had no other choice but to buy some more fire attribute spirit stones if he wanted to stay in this city for a while. Only then could he use this array to strengthen his realm a bit more during his stay here. Therefore, earning spirit stones had now become a matter of vital importance to him. Shi Mu checked the things in his vast earth ring so that he could use them in exchange for the spirit stones that he needed. He found a few magic tools and spirit tools in the ring. He had obtained them from his opponents during his previous battles. In addition, there were also a few spirit grasses, efficacious pills, and ores in the ring. He realized that the stuff in his storage ring might not be able to make a good sum of money. This was obviously excluding the few spirit tools contained therein. After all, those spirit tools were things that could enhance his strength. So, he was reluctant to sell them in a casual manner. Shi Mu's eyes suddenly flashed as they fell on a huge stack of hide in a certain corner of the ring. It seemed that he was left with no choice but to continue with his old profession for now. Shi Mu knew that it wasn't a difficult task for him to draw a few magic charms. However, this place couldn't be considered the same as the eastern continent. Therefore, he decided to go to the city, and inquire about this matter first. He might get a general understanding of the situation here in this way. Shi Mu stood up and walked outside as this thought flashed across his mind. Is Shi Tou going out somewhere again? Cai asked. There is something I need to take care of. Shi Mu said. Then, he walked out of his residence with quick steps, and soon arrived at the shopping street in the city. He then started to walk in and out of the shops in the following time. This process continued until the fall of dusk. Then, he walked out of the street, and headed toward his residence, which was situated in the northern side of the city. There were already plenty of hide magic papers in his vast earth ring. There were also some other materials in the ring that were needed for drawing high-ranked magic charms. Shi Mu had gotten a little understanding of the magic charms that were in high demand in the western continent. He had gained this information via his visits to various local shops along with his intentional or unintentional interaction with people. The wars between the demon race and the barbarian race were relatively frequent in the western continent. And, the magic charms were very effective during an enemy confrontation. In addition, they often exhibited a life-saving effect at times of significance. Therefore, the demand for magic charms wasn't small here. Shi Mu also found that the situation here was exactly the same as he had previously anticipated. There were indeed a limited number of charm magicians in the barbarian race in comparison to the exuberant needs of the magic charms. Furthermore, the barbarian people who were proficient in this field were very few, and in an extremely miserable state. Therefore, they charged a considerably high price for the magic charms if they ever drew one. But, this kind of situation had somewhat changed after the emergence of the Western Dark Moon cult. The Dark Moon cult's magicians were mainly soul magician. So, the number of people who were adept at making magic charms was also considerably higher than the barbarians. The fact was that the greater part of the magic charm business in each big barbarian tribe of the Western continent was handled by the Western Dark Moon cult these days. Moreover, the supply and price of magic charms in the Western continent was also regulated by the Western cult to a certain degree. Even so, the supply of low and middle-ranked magic charms was dominant in the market here. And, their price was almost 10 times higher than that in Eastern continent. As for high-ranked magic charms, they were often considered invaluable. In fact, the big barbarian tribes would vie with each other to purchase them as soon as they would appear in the market. Shi Mu's face revealed a gleam of excitement as this thought crossed his mind. The situation outside the city was very complicated. And, a long time had already passed like this. This meant that a lot of people would be dying to go outside the city. And, the demand for magic charms would significantly increase in light of this. All he needed to do now was to refine some middle and high-ranked magic charms, and earn plenty of spirit stones in exchange. This would certainly help him in maintaining his fire-filled array for the next few days. Shi Mu passed by an intersection, only to find a large crowd of people in front of him. His eyes flashed as he noticed that this was the place where the city lord's office used to issue announcements. And, the gathering of so many people allowed him to conclude that something must have happened here. He thought for a moment in an indecisive manner. Then, he walked over, and blended in with the crowd. A notice had been posted on the notice board once again. Shi Mu's complexion slightly changed when he saw the notice. It was clearly mentioned in this notice that the person who would hunt and kill the murderer of the Red Ring Demon Python would be offered a reward. Shi Tou, Cai cast an anxious look at Shi Mu once. But, all he saw was a calm and composed expression on Shi Mu's face. It seemed as if this news hadn't had the slightest effect on him. Shi Mu mixed in the crowd, and listened to the discussion of surrounding people for some time. Dragon General Kuei's siege had already extended for over a month. So, it had greatly affected the operation of various matters in the city. Therefore, the city lord Yukin couldn't sit still any further. He had eventually decided to seize the culprit, and quell this matter as soon as possible. Shi Mu looked at the notice board for a while. Then, he turned around, and walked away from the crowd. He headed straight toward his dwelling place. 5 days later, in a certain room of his house, Shi Mu looked at the pile of magic charms on the table with an exhausted look on his face. And, a trace of excitement flashed through his face. He had drawn middle-ranked magic charms all day and night over the past few days. And, the outcome of 5 days of exhaustive work was a pile of 40 or more middle-ranked magic charms in front of him. Some of these magic charms were Golden Star Charm, Fire Spear Charm, Catching Vine Charm, and so on. They were considered no better than ordinary middle-ranked magic charms in the eastern continent. However, the effect of these magic charms was several times stronger than that of those totem magic charms in this western continent. Shi Mu received all the magic charms, and walked out of his house once again. He returned to the cave after half a day. He had sold all those magic charms in the market. He had earned around 3,000 or 4,000 spirit stones after excluding some drawing materials and other related costs. This was obviously not a decent earning. But, he would be able to earn at least 20,000 spirit stones if he continued this for an entire month. Shi Mu hadn't chosen the Heavenly Wu Gems Pavilion to sell his magic charms since he knew that the Chamber of Commerce held a very powerful position. His subconscious mind had made him realize that he shouldn't provoke them. After all, he shouldn't let the opposite party know too many secrets of his life. Therefore, he chose an ordinary shop to sell his magic charms. He had already visited this shop before when he had been inquiring about the rising to the heavens mountain peak. The owner of this shop had thick eyebrows. He was named Ai La Mu. The fact was that he had engraved a very favorable impression of himself in Shi Mu's mind at that time. Shi Mu had reached a consensus with the opposite party at that time. They had decided that Shi Mu would sell magic charms here whenever he would draw. However, the opposite party must keep this matter confidential for Shi Mu's sake. In addition, Ai La Mu would also have to collect fire attribute spirit stones along with the various kinds of materials needed to draw magic charms. It was just a trivial matter to Ai La Mu to collect materials for drawing magic charms. As for keeping this matter a secret, he was even more earnest to hide this matter from others. It was because he knew that his chances of earning spirit stones would be adversely affected if other shops came to know about Shi Mu being a charm magician. A month later, Shi Mu stood in front of the stone table in his stone room. He took a deep breath, and exhaled it in a slow manner. Afterwards, he took a fine hide charm paper from the side, and placed it in front of him. Shi Mu had spent a large sum of money to purchase this high-grade hide magic paper. And, his intention was to draw high-ranked magic charms this time. He now had a lot of assurance that he could make high-ranked magic charms correctly after having passed through several consecutive attempts. So, he wanted to give it a shot. He considered for a moment. Then, the magic brush lit up with bright radiance, and landed on the charm paper. 5 days later. Shi Mu's face was smeared with exhaustion at the moment. A lot of stubble had grown on his face. But, a trace of excitement was still peeping through his exhausted face. 10 or more magic charms could be seen on the table. And, a miraculous glow was flickering on their surface. They were high-ranked magic charms. 8 of them were blue-colored wind shadow charms, and 3 were brown-colored escaping into the ground charms. Shi Mu had attempted this wind shadow charm some time before. And, he had an excellent spirit eye to draw support from. Therefore, his success rate turned out very high this time. He succeeded in drawing 8 copies of this magic charm. The escaping into the ground charm was also one of the 5 elements magic charms that were recorded in the charm book on the heaven trigram. This magic charm comprised of altogether 35 magic characters. And, those magic characters were very complicated since they were interwoven in a circuitous manner. Shi Mu might not have succeeded in drawing this magic charm if he hadn't possessed a pair of spirit eyes. However, Shi Mu had still ruined almost 10 sheets of hide in drawing only 3 copies of this magic charm. Shi Mu kept 2 wind shadow charms and 1 escaping into the ground charm for his personal use. And, he handed over the remaining magic charms to Ai La Mu. Ai La Mu looked into Shi Mu's eyes in a manner that made it seem as if he was watching a monster when he received these 8 high-ranked magic charms. The news that Ai La Mu's shop had high-ranked magic charms immediately spread throughout the city. And, it obviously attracted the attention of some of the strongest people in the city. However, Ai La Mu was a shrewd man at the end of the day. So, he kept his mouth tightly zipped about Shi Mu's whereabouts. In fact, he didn't let the slightest information related to Shi Mu slip out of his mouth. 3 months had passed like this. Shi Mu had earned a good number of spirit stones over this period. In fact, he had collected 60,000 or 70,000 spirit stones. And, most of them were fire attribute spirit stones. They were sufficient to maintain the fire-filled array for nearly 6 months. Shi Mu had also informed Ai La Mu that he would suspend drawing magic charms for a while so that he could concentrate on his cultivation. Ai La Mu was somewhat reluctant to this notion, but he didn't dare to offend Shi Mu, the god of gold.